Chapter 344, A Beating a Day, 2, the Blood Moon Sect Elder replied. How can swordsmanship be explained so simply? With the sword and sword intent in the heart, the said sword intent means, although there was a great loss in the Blood Moon Sect Elder's skills, he had cultivated for a long time. Even if he randomly said something, it was extremely profound to those outer sect disciples. With just his talking skills, he won the compliments of many disciples in the outer sect. As the Blood Moon Sect Elder was about to make a high-sounding speech, he suddenly saw a familiar figure walking in his direction at top speed, which cut him from talking immediately. Senior Brother Zhou. Why are you not talking anymore? Those disciples were still staring at the Blood Moon Sect Elder and waiting for him to continue talking but saw his face stiffen. They finally realized and looked in the direction that the Blood Moon Sect Elder was looking at. This look gave those disciples a shock. Isn't that Senior Sister Yi? Although Yi Qingtang entered the sect for only a short time, she was an inner sect disciple now, and outer sect disciples like them naturally addressed her as Senior Sister. Yi Qingtang's entrance into the inner sect caused a stir in the outer sect, and many were still discussing the matter until that day. However, no one had expected that Yi Qingtang, who just entered the inner sect for a few days, would actually return to the outer sect. It should be known that disciples who entered the inner sect were different from outer sect disciples like them. Who would still return here? Why is Senior Sister Yi back? Everyone was filled with curiosity, and they did not sense that the Blood Moon Sect Elder's face had already darkened unknowingly. Junior Brother Zhou, I've something to say. Come with me for a while, Yi Qingtang said coldly the moment she reached the Blood Moon Sect Elder. The disciples looked at the Blood Moon Sect Elder, who had a frozen expression. The Blood Moon Sect Elder's lips twitched, and he replied rather stiffly. All right. Then, Yi Qingtang brought the Blood Moon Sect Elder to a place without anyone. The disciples stared blankly at the back view of those two people. They did hear of the tension between Yi Qingtang and Zhou Chu, as well as the rumors that Yi Qingtang had something to do with his brother's death. Now that Yi Qingtang suddenly came to look for Zhou Chu, was she here to pick a quarrel with him? Just the thought of it caused them to feel numb. Right now, Yi Qingtang was an official inner sect disciple. How was Zhou Chu her opponent? As everyone guessed, Yi Qingtang had already led the Blood Moon Sect Elder to an empty place. What are you looking for me for? The Blood Moon Sect Elder looked at Yi Qingtang in annoyance. Without Yi Qingtang in the outer sect over the past few days, he was able to live very comfortably. Yet, who knew that this girl would actually return here again today? Yi Qingtang narrowed her eyes at the frustrated Blood Moon Sect Elder. What am I looking for you for? I've only been in the inner sect for a few days, and some outer sect disciples disappeared unknowingly. Shouldn't you give me an explanation for this? There was a slight change in the Blood Moon Sect Elder's eyes after hearing Yi Qingtang's words, although he initially had a frustrated expression. His eyes shifted to a side as he mumbled. Why are you asking me for an explanation for the disappearance of those disciples? It has nothing to do with me. Nothing to do with you. Yi Qingtang scoffed. Do you think I believe that? Chapter 345, A Beating a Day, 3, I can't help it if you don't believe me. I really didn't do anything, the Blood Moon Sect Elder's eyes fleeted. Yi Qingtang looked coldly at the Blood Moon Sect Elder, who tried to find excuses. After scanning the surrounding and ensuring there was no one nearby, she sprinted to the Blood Moon Sect Elder's front, and before he could react, she grabbed his collar and threw him over her shoulder. With a loud bang, the Blood Moon Sect Elder immediately saw stars from the beating. What are you doing? Yi Qingtang lifted the Blood Moon Sect Elder who was grimacing in pain. Don't think that I don't know how you've been looking at the disciples here as though you want to eat them up alive ever since you entered the sect. If I wasn't watching over you, you would have taken so many lives already. I'm accused, the Blood Moon Sect Elder was adamant to not admit it. Yi Qingtang narrowed her threat-filled eyes. I don't care whether you've done it or not. I'm telling you that you must enter the inner sect of Xianling sect in a month. Otherwise, I'll beat you up until all your teeth drop. She did not think that he would be so bold to kill disciples within the sect. If anyone found out about it, not only would his identity as the Blood Moon sect elder be revealed, but she would also get into trouble. Enter the inner sect. The Blood Moon sect elder suddenly looked at her. I can't even beat you the other time. How would I have the ability to enter the inner sect? Even if you wanted me to enter, you should help me to regain my powers somehow. Ow! Before the Blood Moon sect elder finished his sentence, he was punched by Yi Qingtang, and tears spilled instantly due to the pain. Goddamn Yi Qingtang. If not for the fact that my skills are not yet recovered, I would definitely chop her into pieces. I don't care what means you use, but I'm telling you that from today on, I'll give you a beating a day every day until you enter the inner sect. Yi Qingtang narrowed her eyes that were overflowing with threat. If this fellow continued to remain in the outer sect, God knows how many outer sect disciples would be killed by him. She must get him into the inner sect. The assessment has already ended. Where am I going to find a way to enter the inner sect? Tears were streaming from the Blood Moon sect elder's eyes after being punched by Yi Qingtang, and he wished he could scold all her ancestors. It was really a case of how a man who lost position and influence would be subjected to indignity. Find a way yourself. This is all I have to say. Yi Qingtang uttered. The Blood Moon sect elder curled his lips and thought to himself, you've entered the inner sect already, how would you have the time to beat me up? Like hell I'll believe you. He did not know that Yi Qingtang already pretty much guessed his thoughts. Looking at his indifferent behavior, Yi Qingtang's lips curled up, and a devilish smile broke out on her face. I live up to my words. Although I'm in the inner sect, senior brother Yun, senior brother Qin, and the rest are still in the outer sect. Luckily, it's almost the end of the year, and they don't have anything on hand. I believe they'll be very willing to practice with you every day. The Blood Moon sect elder's face darkened immediately. Yi Qingtang did enter the inner sect, but her group of senior brothers and sisters were still in the outer sect. If Yi Qingtang gave orders, the Blood Moon sect elder could not help but feel a chill run down his spine. Although he absorbed the essence of a few outer sect disciples, which made up a little for his loss, the skills of Lin Long, Gu Yanqiu, Qin Huan, and Yun Shu were still above average in the outer sect. If they all ganged up on him, he would only be beaten up. Chapter 346, A Starving Camel is Still Bigger Than a Horse. 1. At the thought that he would receive a beating every day as long as he was still in the outer sect, the Blood Moon sect elder's heart turned cold instantly. This girl was clearly a disciple from an orthodox sect. Why was it that she was even more shameless than he, a heretic sect elder, when it came to threatening people? I'll go look for my senior brothers later. You can slowly think about how you want to live from now on. After finishing her sentence, Yi Qingtang released the Blood Moon sect elder and took a glimpse at him with a spurious smile. Then, she turned around and left, seeming to be headed to brief Qin Huan and the rest. The Blood Moon sect elder watched Yi Qingtang's departing back view and was extremely aggrieved. What kind of bad luck did he have to meet Yi Qingtang, such a devilish person, in Deer City? If he knew he was going to meet Yi Qingtang in Deer City, he would have definitely made a detour. But now, it was all too late. After meeting Yi Qingtang, the Blood Moon sect elder originally thought he was lucky and felt that Yi Qingtang was only scaring him. Yet, the next morning, Qin Huan and Gu Yanqiu appeared before him with a look that harbored evil designs and invited him for a practice. The last bit of luck he felt was completely crushed. When the Blood Moon sect elder crawled up with a swollen face, his heart completely crumbled as he watched Qin Huan and Gu Yanqiu bid him goodbye. Yi Qingtang. You're ruthless. The Blood Moon sect elder finally saw it clearly that Yi Qingtang was real this time. If he did not find a way to enter the inner sect quickly, his life would end right here, much less find an opportunity to absorb essence from other disciples. Thus, the Blood Moon sect elder could only hug his head that swelled into the size of a pig's head and ran to the elder's hall, puffing. In the elder's hall, Elder Huang had been in a good mood these few days. Yuan Wei and Yi Qingtang gave him face in the inner sect assessment a few days ago. Being in a good mood, he was more patient and kind when interacting with other disciples. Elder Huang, I heard that Yuan Wei improved quite a lot recently. The elder from the outer sect's array faction asked with a smile. Yuan Wei's natural endowment was extremely high. Now that he was accepted into the sect, he obviously would not be bad if he trained hard, Elder Huang said cheerily. Now that Yi Qingtang entered the inner sect, he thought that if Yuan Wei worked hard this year, he would definitely be able to enter the inner sect next year. As the two elders were chatting, a figure suddenly appeared outside the elders' hall. Before they fixed their eyes on the person, they suddenly realized that the person standing outside the hall was actually a disciple who was badly battered. The Blood Moon sect elder stood outside the elders' hall with a swollen face and looked at Elder Huang. Elder Huang, I have something to report. Elder Huang frowned. What is it? I wish to attempt the Thunder Array. The Blood Moon sect elder tried to remain calm, but there was a wave of emotions in his heart. He was a dignified Blood Moon sect elder, and yet he was actually forced to go through such misery in the sect by a little girl. Even spitting a mouthful of blood would not dispel all his pent-up frustration. Thunder Array. Elder Huang and the Array faction's elder from aside were taken aback. The Thunder Array was one of the array formations that Xianling sect provided for disciples to challenge. Up to this date, the number of disciples who could solve the Thunder Array could be counted with a hand, and there were barely any who could do so in the inner sect. This outer sect disciple dared to speak so wildly and challenge the Thunder Array. Chapter 347, A starving camel is still bigger than a horse too. What is your name? The Array faction elder asked. Zhou Chu, replied the Blood Moon sect elder. The Array faction elder frowned slightly. There were some disciples in the outer sect who were learning about the profound meaning behind array formations, but Zhou Chu's name was not in the list. You want to challenge the Thunder Formation? Are you aware that this array formation is dangerous and that you may lose your life in the array if you're not careful? Although the Thunder Array was provided for the sect disciples to challenge, those who dared to attempt it had learned about array formations. Moreover, the Thunder Array was lethal, and if the disciple had not grasped the main points, he or she would definitely be either killed or severely injured. Forget about Zhou Chu, a disciple whose name was not recorded in the Array faction at all. Only a few of the disciples who studied array formations dared to attempt it. I am aware. Please give me a chance, elder. The Blood Moon sect elder felt extremely aggrieved. He was a dignified Blood Moon sect elder yet had to be so subservient and speak humbly to two useless sect elders. If this was in the past, he could kill them with just the wave of a finger. If not for that goddamn Yi Qingtang's threat, he would only attempt the whatsoever Thunder Array if he had nothing better to do. In terms of skills, the Blood Moon sect elder was simply unable to enter the top 10 on the excellence roll, and even if he did, he had already missed the assessment this year. To prevent Yi Qingtang from sending people to beat him up daily, he could only use this method. Was it not just an inner sect of a sect? Find authorized novels in web novel faster updates, better experience please click www.webnovel.com for visiting. As a Blood Moon sect elder, would he need to use brute force if he wanted to go in? Elder Huang and the Array faction elder exchanged a look. Although they thought that Zhou Chu was a little weird, they eventually agreed after considering for a while. After all, the Thunder Array was originally for disciples to challenge. After obtaining the permission from the two elders, the Blood Moon sect elder finally attempted the Thunder Array. Watching the Blood Moon sect elder's brave and heroic back view, Elder Huang and the Array faction elder could only shake their heads. They only felt that Zhou Chu was seeking death and was not too bothered with him. The two elders returned to the topic that they were previously talking about. However, before they talked for long, a warden rushed over with a weird expression. Reporting elders, that Zhou Chu. What happened? Is he injured in the thunder array? Just order a physician to take a look. That will do, said the array faction elder calmly. However, the warden shook his head hurriedly. No, Zhou Chu is not injured, and he already solved the thunder array. What? The array faction elder was alarmed. Zhou Chu actually really solved the thunder array? How much time had passed since he left? Then, the array faction elder's expression changed slightly. Looking at Elder Huang, who was similarly surprised, he said, Elder Huang, I did not expect Zhou Chu to solve the array. Moreover, he solved it in such a short amount of time. I need to report this to Elder Qin of the inner sect immediately. I'll take my leave first. Then, the elder from the outer sect array faction left. Elder Huang was a little dazed. Solving the thunder array was something that only elite inner sect disciples who specialized in array formations had a possibility of accomplishing. Unexpectedly, Zhou Chu actually had such amazing talent in array formations. The Blood Moon sect elder solved the thunder array within an extremely short span of time, displaying his high attainment in array formations. This traveled into the ears of Elder Qin, the inner sect's array faction elder, and on that afternoon, the Blood Moon sect elder was given an exception to be accepted as a disciple under Elder Qin. There was a burst of discussions in the outer sect the moment the news was passed out. The very first moment the Blood Moon sect elder was brought into the inner sect, he saw Yi Qingtang, who was staring at him with a devious smile. We meet again, senior brother Zhou. Yi Qingtang smiled devilishly. She did not think that the Blood Moon sect elder would enter the inner sect so quickly. It seemed that senior brother Qin and the rest did take care of him relatively thoroughly. The Blood Moon sect elder whom Yi Qingtang did dirty to could only clench his teeth secretly. Only ghosts would want to meet you. How I wish I do not need to see you again for the rest of my life. Chapter 348, A starving camel is still bigger than a horse. 3. No matter how badly the Blood Moon sect elder wished to not see Yi Qingtang again, he had already entered the inner sect then, and there was nowhere he could hide even if he wanted to. Since he just entered the inner sect, his allocated area of residence was coincidentally right next to Yi Qingtang's, and the distance between the 2 yards was at most a few steps only. The Blood Moon sect elder stood outside his own courtyard and looked at Yi Qingtang, who was standing a few steps away from him, with an utterly dark expression as though he had just swallowed a fly. Forget about sneaking off to absorb an inner sect disciple's essence, even where he went on usual days was going to be tightly watched by Yi Qingtang. Before the Blood Moon sect elder was done grumbling, Yi Qingtang invited herself into the Blood Moon sect elder's yard. The Blood Moon sect elder was allocated a sword boy and an attendant girl. Those 2 kids were not old and appeared to be about the same age as Fei Ying and Nai Shang. Those 2 children still had a rather muddle-headed look in their eyes. Noticing that Yi Qingtang entered, they naturally identified her as an inner sect disciple as well and served her carefully. With a dark expression, the Blood Moon sect elder sat at a table and threw a dissatisfied look at Yi Qingtang. I've already entered the inner sect according to your request. Are you satisfied now? Find authorized novels in Webnovel faster updates, better experience. Please click www.webnovel.com for visiting. Yi Qingtang chuckled. Looking at the Blood Moon sect elder's ugly expression, she was unhurried and calm, though she glanced at the 2 kids that were occupied with work outside the house. The sword boys and attendant girls in the inner sect have good natural endowments, but you better behave and not think of anything. If you ever do anything, the sect will not just drop the matter, and I will not let you off easily, Yi Qingtang said straightforwardly. The outer sect disciples could already pique the Blood Moon sect elder's interest, and if it was in the inner sect where there was plenty of elites, the Blood Moon sect elder would probably be dizzy just by looking at them. Guilt crept into the Blood Moon sect elder's heart. He did eye the 2 kids here previously, but never did he expect that this thought was crushed by Yi Qingtang the moment he conceived it. Obviously, I know that without you telling me. Even though he was seen through, he still denied in a serious manner. Yi Qingtang glimpsed at the Blood Moon sect elder, and her lips curled into a smile. She slowly took out a bottle of elixir from her space ring and placed it before the Blood Moon sect elder. Take this. The Blood Moon sect elder took a look at the bottle, and a disdainful smile broke out on his face. Throwing him a bone. Was Yi Qingtang not treating him too much of a joke? Even though his skills were not as powerful as before, these elixirs in sects were nothing to him. Yi Qingtang saw the Blood Moon sect elder's contemptuous expression and chuckled. This is the source of the marrow pill. When the Blood Moon sect elder heard the word source of the marrow pill, astonishment flashed across his eyes, and the look of belittlement on his face vanished into thin air. His reaction fell into Yi Qingtang's eyes, and her eyes smiled even deeper. The source of the marrow pill was different from ordinary elixirs used to nourish the spirit root. It mainly nourished one's state of mind and recovered the lost vitality. In her previous life, Yi Qingtang did not have a spirit root, and her focus was naturally shifted to elixirs which recuperated other forces. Spirit root was no longer of any use to the Blood Moon sect elder after resurrecting. What he needed was something which could nourish his vitality. Why do you have the source of the marrow pill? The Blood Moon sect elder secretly concealed his surprise and asked in a faint casual tone. Chapter 349, Carrot and Stick Approach. 1. The Blood Moon sect's main cultivation technique was not based on the spirit root, and thus, most of the elixirs they desired thousands of years ago were different from other cultivators. This source of the marrow pill was one of the superior elixirs that they desired. However, the formula for this pill had been lost for years, and the Blood Moon sect had spent much effort but was still unable to find its trace even before it was exterminated. To date, the words source of the marrow pill were no longer in one's knowledge. Yi Qingtang was only barely over 10 years old. How would she know about the source of the marrow pill? And how was she able to have a real source of the marrow pill? A smile emerged in Yi Qingtang's eyes as she looked at the Blood Moon sect elder, who tried to maintain his composure. In her previous life, Yi Yu led a group of people to try to take Yi Qingtang's life for many years, and Yi Qingtang was forced into hiding. After an avalanche, a snowfield in the mountains collapsed, and she incidentally found a tomb that was covered with dust for thousands of years. In the tomb buried unimaginable medical books and formulas, and Yi Qingtang found the formula for the source of the marrow pill from there. The source of the marrow pill was not the only formula she found, there were countless of formulas that were highly valued. However, she was found by a group of people after hiding there for a few days. She was unable to defeat them at that time and could only escape hurriedly after taking a brief look. Thinking about it now, many medical books and ancient formulas on Earth had disappeared, but there were many stored in that tomb. It seemed that the owner of that tomb must be extremely formidable. In her previous life, Yi Qingtang only managed to read a small portion of the books, and her alchemy skills had already reached a considerably high level. If she could finish reading all of them. Yi Qingtang narrowed her eyes. The location of that tomb was still vivid in her memory, and she must make a trip there again this lifetime. If she did not remember wrongly, the avalanche would happen a year later, and afterward, that tomb would be discovered, and the person who stole the treasures was powerful. She must quickly raise her skills within a year, otherwise, she would not have the ability to compete with that person at that time. Yi Qingtang still remembered how powerful that person became after obtaining the treasures in the tomb. If those items fell in her hands, it would undoubtedly be an additional, huge bargaining chip for her. At that thought, Yi Qingtang stopped recollecting and looked at the doubtful Blood Moon sect elder. I refined it myself. Is there any problem? The Blood Moon sect elder looked at Yi Qingtang in disbelief. She refined it herself? If she knew how to refine the source of the marrow pill, wouldn't he be able to fly up to the sky? You don't believe me? Yi Qingtang raised a brow. Do you think I believe you? The Blood Moon sect elder asked. Yi Qingtang shrugged slightly. Want you know whether to believe me or not after you try it? Or should I say that you, a Blood Moon sect elder, have never seen the real source of the marrow pill? The Blood Moon sect elder's face darkened. He had seen the source of the marrow pill before, but it was only once. That pill was obtained by the sect master of the Blood Moon sect after much effort, and there was only one such pill. As an elder, he could only see it. Perhaps agitated by Yi Qing Tang, the Blood Moon sect elder took over the bottle snappily and opened it. As the bottle was opened, a dark red pill rolled into his palm, and a faint smell of blood traveled into his nose. All it took was a moment for the Blood Moon sect elder to be alarmed. Chapter 350, Carrot and Stick Approach, 2. Regardless of its color or smell, this pill was actually exactly the same as the one that his sect master obtained that time. The disbelief that he had initially faded away immediately. He looked up at Yi Qing Tang questioningly and then back at the pill. Hesitation filled his eyes. The source of the marrow pill had disappeared for a long time, and the last pill was obtained by the Blood Moon sect's sect master. However, it had been thousands of years from then. How was Yi Qing Tang able to know the true appearance of the source of the marrow pill? The more the Blood Moon sect elder pondered, the more he found it strange. The pill was already in his palm, and whether to consume it or not was a question. After thinking over and over again, he ultimately decided to give it a try. After all, there was a blood pact between him and Yi Qing Tang. If Yi Qing Tang wanted to poison him, she would not benefit at all. The Blood Moon sect elder narrowed his eyes and made a decision. If this pill was real, then when he regained his powers, he would definitely make Yi Qing Tang pay all the humiliation he suffered back. Instantly, the Blood Moon sect elder placed the source of the marrow pill in his mouth. The moment it was in his mouth, the blood smell spread throughout his mouth and into his throat as he swallowed. A warm sensation could be felt in his abdomen area subsequently. In just a moment, the Blood Moon sect elder's eyes brightened. He could clearly feel that the deficiency in his spirit was slowly repairing, and the effect was much faster than absorbing the essence of sect disciples. As his spirit was slowly recovered, the Blood Moon sect elder was increasingly delighted. Just as he was absorbed in the elation of recovering his powers, the effect of the source of the marrow pill suddenly frittered away, and the feeling of resurrection disappeared as well. The Blood Moon sect elder sat there at a loss, though the fascination never left his eyes. How is it? I didn't lie to you, did I? Yi Qing Tang looked at the Blood Moon sect elder's behavior smilingly. She was still confident in her alchemy skills. After all, most of the pills and elixirs she used in her previous life were personally refined by her. The Blood Moon sect elder's expression became complicated. He could clearly feel that his powers recovered slightly, but it was far from when he was at his peak. You really refined this source of the marrow pill yourself? The Blood Moon sect elder felt the effects of the pill and fully believed that it was indeed the source of the marrow pill. However, he was completely unable to comprehend why Yi Qing Tang, a girl only a little over 10 years old, would actually know the formula for the source of the marrow pill, which had disappeared for many years. Of course. Yi Qing Tang replied. The Blood Moon sect elder's expression turned even more complicated. Although his powers did recover, it was not complete, and he could not kill Yi Qing Tang instantly. If their strife set off the blood pact, he would die without a doubt. Furthermore, if Yi Qing Tang really did refine the source of the marrow pill, wouldn't he lose the chance of recovering rapidly in the future if he killed her now? It is not just the source of the marrow pill. I can also refine the bonded soul pill, Yi Qing Tang suddenly said. The Blood Moon sect elder's eyes almost popped out. Bonded soul pill. That was the divine bonded soul pill that could allow him to directly recover to his peak. You really can refine it? Excitement emerged in the Blood Moon sect elder's eyes. Yi Qing Tang nodded calmly. Without saying, the formula for the bonded soul pill was also obtained from that tomb. The Blood Moon sect elder was agitated. Chapter 351, Carrot and Stick Approach, 3. If he really consumed the bonded soul pill, he could return to his peak. Instantly, the Blood Moon sect elder no longer looked at Yi Qingtang with despise like before, and his eyes were instead twinkling with expectation. Just as the Blood Moon sect elder's eyes were burning in excitement, Yi Qingtang poured cold water on him. I can refine the bonded soul pill, but it requires the essence of the world, which is extremely difficult to obtain. I don't have it now. The Blood Moon sect elder's full heart of expectation vanished instantly, and all energy was lost. Yet, on another thought, as long as Yi Qingtang knew the formula for the bonded soul pill, he still had a chance of returning to his peak as long as he found a way to gather the materials. No hurry, no hurry. We can slowly search and gather for the materials in the future, said the Blood Moon sect elder pleasingly. Yi Qingtang watched the Blood Moon sect elder's rare act of pleasing her, and a trace of laughter flashed across her eyes silently. That's fine as well. If I don't have anything on in the future, I can make some source of the marrow pill for you to nourish yourself. The bonded soul pill can wait a while. The Blood Moon sect elder nodded repeatedly, though he scoffed internally. He would go along with this girl right now, but once he obtained the bonded soul pill in the future, he would definitely destroy this girl. Yi Qingtang looked at the Blood Moon sect elder silently, and the smile in her heart deepened. Although the Blood Moon sect elder's skills decreased greatly, his experience and inside information of all aspects were way beyond those of ordinary people. Even though he was unable to be of help in her martial skills and cultivation, he would be a great help to her in other areas. If the Blood Moon sect elder was not used properly, he would be a fatal sword, but if made use of well, he was a sharp blade that countered enemies. She was obviously aware of the Blood Moon sect elder's hatred towards her, but, since she dared to make use of him, she had a certain level of confidence. You must be careful in the inner sect from now on. Don't stir up any trouble. Yi Qingtang warned. She handed the Blood Moon sect elder the source of the marrow pill because she was afraid he would start messing around in the inner sect. The inner sect was not comparable to the outer sect. If any inner sect disciples disappeared, the sect elders might personally investigate the case. Rest assured, I will take note of it. The Blood Moon sect elder was very easy to talk to this time. Anyway, with the source of the marrow pill, it was no longer that important to absorb the disciple's essence. Furthermore, he was still anticipating the bonded soul pill that Yi Qingtang would refine in the future, and obviously, he had to give her face now. After warning the Blood Moon sect elder repeatedly, Yi Qingtang finally left his courtyard, and he actually walked her out himself in a rare good mood. It was just that these two people had their own thoughts, and it was still unknown who would gain the upper hand in the future. Yi Qingtang returned from the Blood Moon sect elders and had one less worry. However, she did not return to her residence immediately and walked in the opposite direction instead. The Blood Moon sect elder's side was considered to be settled, but Yi Qingtang's most important issue was her own skills. In another half a month, she could participate in sect missions, and the Xianming points in her hands were already depleted. She would still have to take on missions at that time, and only then would she able to cultivate in the Spirit Consonance River more frequently to raise her skills in the shortest time possible. At that thought, Yi Qingtang's eyes fell on the demonic blood sword on her waist. An invincible sword capable of destroying anything was definitely a winning weapon in missions. Chapter 352, Sword Spirit Workshop. 1. The demonic blood sword itself was already powerful, but to Yi Qingtang, it was not enough. Yi Qingtang still had over 10 spirit crystals in her hands. Using a special method to embed the spirit crystals in a weapon could directly raise its combat effectiveness by an entire grade. When Yi Qingtang bought that batch of spirit crystals from Tonghua, she already had a plan in mind. However, her sword was too inferior that time, and there would not have been any huge combat power increases even if she were to embed spirit crystals in it. However, the demonic blood sword she had currently was different. As long as spirit crystals were embedded in it, Yi Qingtang was confident that she could make the demonic blood sword as powerful as those supposed divine weapons. After making up her mind, Yi Qingtang brought the demonic blood sword and headed towards the sword spirit workshop. The Sword Spirit Workshop was a place to forge weapons in exchange for Xianming points and was, however, only open to inner sect disciples. If any disciples wanted to make a weapon, they could head to the Sword Spirit Workshop directly and request the blacksmiths to help them as long as they had enough Xianming points to pay. In her previous life, although Yi Qingtang did hear of the Sword Spirit Workshop, she had never been there herself. After all, the fee for the Sword Spirit Workshop was not what she could afford previously. When Yi Qingtang was about to reach the Sword Spirit Workshop, she saw two disciples walking out from the workshop with rather ugly expressions. "I told you not to go to the Sword Spirit Workshop, but you didn't believe me. Now that you've been met with a flat refusal, do you believe me now?" a disciple said impolitely. The other disciple wailed. "I only heard that the blacksmiths in the Sword Spirit Workshop have a huge temper but did not expect them to be so arrogant. Forging a dagger actually required tens of thousands of Xianming points. How can this be? Isn't this the same as snatching money? Quickly shut up. If those blacksmiths hear this, you will have a hard time in the future. Clearly, they are the ones who are arrogant. They're just a group of blacksmiths but behave more haughtily than the inner sect wardens. Why can't I talk about them? Why do you think they can be so haughty? Isn't it all because the Grand Elder is supporting them? If they reported what you said, do you still wish to stay in the inner sect? It's not like you don't know that our Grand Elder loves blacksmithing. The Sword Spirit Workshop is said to be for disciples to forge a weapon, but doesn't it serve the Grand Elder in reality? Otherwise, do you think that a blacksmith's position would be higher than a warden's? It is said that way, but no one has seen the Grand Elder in the Sword Spirit Workshop before. Do you think the Grand Elder is free on normal days? Why would he be in the Sword Spirit Workshop for nothing? The two disciples chatted for quite a while, and their expressions turned uglier. Yi Qingtang brushed past those two people, and her eyes narrowed when she heard their conversation. She had also heard some rumors regarding the Sword Spirit Workshop in her previous life. Although this place had high mastery in sword making, there were not many disciples who dared to go. Not because of anything else, but the very fact that the blacksmiths in the Sword Spirit Workshop were extremely haughty. The Sword Spirit Workshop was initially opened because of the interest of the previous sect master, who was also the current Grand Elder. The Grand Elder's position in the sect was way higher than the sect master's, and he was the highest skilled figure in all sections. He would not appear in the sect on usual days and only struck when the sect faced a crisis. He could be said to be extremely mysterious. Chapter 353, Sword Spirit Workshop, 2. There had already been rumors in Xianling's sect that the Grand Elder loved blacksmithing and that the Sword Spirit Workshop was catered to his interest. With the Grand Elder's protection, even the inner sect elders were relatively polite to the blacksmiths there, much less ordinary disciples. Perhaps, those two disciples complained a bit because they suffered in the Sword Spirit Workshop, but one could still hear the fear in their words. Yi Qingtang was not too concerned though. She was there to strengthen the demonic blood sword and could not be bothered about anything else. In just a while, Yi Qingtang reached the entrance of the Sword Spirit Workshop. Although the Sword Spirit Workshop was open to forge weapons, the place was relatively magnificent. Before Yi Qingtang entered the workshop, she was already able to feel the gradual increase in the surrounding temperature. When Yi Qingtang entered the workshop, she saw a few blacksmiths making weapons. As the hammers landed, a clank sounded, and sparks flew everywhere. Surrounded by furnaces, the temperature of the Sword Spirit Workshop was frighteningly high. All types of weapons were hung on the walls of the Sword Spirit Workshop, and from the sharp blades, it was evident that they were of relatively fine quality. Although they were a group of arrogant blacksmiths, their standards were way above those of the blacksmiths outside the sect. Yi Qingtang's arrival did not draw any attention from the blacksmiths, who even could not be bothered to look up and only focused on the work on hand. An in-charge sitting aside was smoking an opium pipe every now and then. Lifting an eyelid lazily, he swept an indifferent look across Yi Qingtang, who entered the workshop. "In charge, I wish to forget a sword. How do I go about doing this?" Yi Qingtang walked forward and said politely. The in-charge glanced at Yi Qingtang and took 2 puffs before answering casually. What kind of sword do you wish to forge? Yi Qingtang removed the demonic blood sword hung on her waist. The warden took a look and nodded slightly, though he still had an emotionless expression on his face. 30,000 Xianming points. Yi Qingtang was dumbfounded instantly. 30,000 Xianming points. Was this a joke? With another 10,000, it was enough to exchange for the demonic blood sword. The in-charge saw Yi Qingtang's expression and said, I quoted this price because your sword is pretty good. If it were some ordinary plaything, no one would help you to forge even if you paid double the price. Yi Qingtang could tell that the blacksmiths here were not easy to deal with. A casual quote was already tens of thousands of Xianming points, and whether they forged it was another matter altogether. It was all dependent on whether the weapon could catch the attention of the blacksmiths. Yi Qingtang wanted to strengthen the demonic blood sword, but 30,000 Xianming points was definitely not a price she could afford to pay. She was not a fool. They really were working under the Grand Elder. Look at how different their tone was. Yi Qingtang had a little headache. Not mentioning how she did not have so many Xianming points, but even if she did, she would definitely not be willing to spend so lavishly like that. However, she was not resigned to leaving her weapon as it was. Then, Yi Qingtang scanned her surrounding and finally spoke after some hesitation, I don't have 30,000 Xianming points. I'm afraid I can't request the masters to personally work on it. I wonder if I can forge it myself. The in-charge scanned Yi Qingtang and could not help but chuckle after noticing her thin wrists and legs. Knocking on his opium pipe, he leaned back on his chair lazily and asked, You wish to forge it yourself? Chapter 354 Sword Spirit Workshop 3, Yi Qingtang nodded. That's fine, but you will have to pay 1,000 Xianming points regardless of whether it will be successful or not, said the in-charge casually, as it was not the first time seeing disciples who wanted to smith a weapon themselves. After all, the fees for the Sword Spirit Workshop was exorbitant and not what ordinary disciples could afford. However, those disciples who requested to forge a weapon themselves usually failed horribly. It was no wonder though. How would these young masters and ladies who usually prioritized cultivation have come into contact with forging? Forging was not something that could be successful just by randomly picking a metal and hammering it. Forging was a profound craft which required immense knowledge on various techniques, such as the temperature, duration to smelt, timing to hammer, amount of force to exert, and distributing the weight. How would a layman understand this? If one did not understand the techniques of forging, they would not be able to forge an ordinary dagger, much less a divine weapon. Find authorized novels in web novel faster updates, better experience please click www.webnovel.com for visiting. The in-charge presumed that Yi Qingtang was same as those disciples and was too lazy to say anything else. 1,000 Xianming points were not considered small, but this was way better than the exorbitant 30,000 Xianming points, and thus, Yi Qingtang swiftly handed 1,000 Xianming points. After receiving the Xianming points, the in-charge stood up leisurely and led Yi Qingtang around a forging room, ultimately bringing her to a plain-looking corner. An old anvil was placed there along with an extinguished, cold furnace beside it. You will forge your weapon here. There are some materials around here. Take whatever you want to use. It'll give you 6 hours, and afterward, you must leave no matter whether you're done forging, said the in-charge. Okay. Yi Qingtang scanned the conditions of the place without saying anything. She had no options anyway. Knowing the rules of the Sword Spirit Workshop, she naturally did not speak much. If the other party was unhappy and chased her out, there was no room for her to resist. Who dared to be unruly on the Grand Elder's turf? The in-charge saw that Yi Qingtang knew how to behave and left casually without saying anything. Yi Qingtang did not dare to waste any time with only 6 hours on hand. Rolling up her sleeves immediately, she lit the furnace, prepared some water, and wiped the anvil and tools clean. The in-charge just left, but a blacksmith hurried over and whispered something in his ears. There was a change in the in-charge's expression. Yi Qingtang was about done with her preparation. She placed the demonic blood sword on the anvil and looked at it repeatedly. She spent much effort to obtain this demonic blood sword, and if she accidentally damaged it from the forging, she would not be able to bear it. "Little girl, are you intending to forge this sword?" Suddenly, a rather old voice traveled from behind Yi Qingtang. Turning around, Yi Qingtang saw a plainly clothed elderly with a gray beard standing behind her with his hands behind him as he looked at the demonic blood sword on the anvil. "Yes." Yi Qingtang smiled, thinking that he was a blacksmith in the sword spirit workshop. "This sword is all right. However, you must be careful when forging it. The material of this sword becomes very brittle when in contact with fire." The elderly frowned slightly. Looking at the young and innocent lady, he felt that the sword before her was most likely going to be ruined. "I will be careful," Yi Qingtang replied courteously. As the elderly was frowning, she directly placed the blade of the demonic blood sword in the fire. The scarlet flame engulfed the blade instantly, and the sword's glint was covered by the flame. The elderly's brows twitched slightly. "This is called careful. You threw it in without the slightest hesitation." Chapter 355, Blinding Forging Skills. 1. Witnessing Yi Qingtang's reckless act, the elderly shook his head in disappointment and walked aside. When the other blacksmiths saw the elderly, they clearly had reverent expressions in their eyes but did not reveal it on their faces as they continued to focus on their work on hand. Yi Qingtang watched the demonic blood sword burn red and focused all her attention on it. Once a yellow glimmer emerged in the sea of red, she immediately removed the demonic blood sword and placed it on the anvil. Grasping the correct timing, she immediately gripped the few spirit crystals that she had prepared earlier and embedded them into the burning red demonic blood sword. Those spirit crystals were carefully selected by her as the spirit energy in them completely aligned with the properties of the demonic blood sword. The elderly from not far away cast a cold look and frowned immediately. After he identified that the materials that Yi Qingtang was embedding into the sword were spirit crystals, his frown could not help but deepen. Ridiculous, spirit crystals were of little value, and the sword she had was considered pretty good. Yet, this girl had no idea of the gravity and casually embedded something in it, which would probably ruin the air of that sword. What a waste of that good sword, the elderly shook his head. At that instant, the in-charge of the sword spirit workshop noticed the elderly's presence and hurried over. He frantically bowed in respect but was stopped by the elderly, who lifted a hand slightly. The in-charge heaved a sigh of relief secretly. Following the elderly's eyes, he spotted Yi Qingtang and could not help but frown after noticing what she was doing. Wouldn't embedding spirit crystals into a sword damage the sword itself? "This disciple is too reckless," said the in-charge. "That girl appears to be pretty young. She is going to ruin a good sword." "Go tell her to stop," uttered the elderly with a frown. The in-charge nodded slightly and walked towards Yi Qingtang. However, Yi Qingtang happened to have finished embedding, and she threw the scarlet sword into the water to cold. Sizzles could be heard instantly. Mist gently filled the air. The elderly shook his head silently at that sight. The sword was done forging, and it was already too late to stop her. There was no way of saving it now. The in-charge was rather speechless as well. But when Yi Qingtang took the demonic blood sword out of the water, there was actually a red glimmer that wrapped around the sword body. "What's going on?" The elderly was slightly taken aback, and the expression in his eyes changed when he saw the floating red glimmer on the blade. If that sword was only considered not bad before, then now, it could completely be worthy of the divine weapon title. The in-charge was stunned as well. He had never seen such a situation after years of forging. Their gazes were frozen instantly, but Yi Qingtang did not realize their stares at all. As she looked at the completely new demonic blood sword, a smile broke out on her tiny, sweat-beaded face. Success! She did not have a spirit root in her previous life and had difficulties in improving her cultivation. Thus, she spent a lot of effort and energy on other aspects. Regardless of whether it was refining pills or forging items, as long as it could increase her combat power, she would invest a lot of energy to learn and practice them. She spent near 100 years on forging in her previous life. Not mentioning about anything else, just based on her current forging skills, she was already better than quite a number of renowned blacksmiths. 30,000 Xianming points. If not for the fact that she did not have a place to forge her weapon, she could not even be bothered to pay that 1,000 Xianming points. Chapter 356, Blinding Forging Skills, 2. However, Yi Qingtang could not be bothered with these. Everything she did was merely to allow her to have even more chips to confront Yi Yu. Seeing that the forging of the demonic blood sword was completed, Yi Qingtang estimated that there was still some time left. Then, her eyes landed on a pile of meteoric iron laid aside. Since she had already spent 1,000 Xianming points, why not make use of this time to forge some other things? Then, Yi Qingtang bent down to select suitable materials. The expressions of the elderly and in charge, who were standing not far away, had long turned a little weird. The in-charge was about to walk up to her but was stopped by the elderly. Looking at her, it seems that she still wants to continue. "Let's watch first," said the elderly in a composed manner. Stunned, the in-charge nodded and retreated to a side, although there was a look of surprise in his eyes. The elderly's eyes were fully fixed on Yi Qingtang, who chose a black slab of iron from the pile of materials. His eyes twinkled. "Is that the black gold meteorite iron?" The elderly looked at the in-charge beside him. The in-charge was dumbfounded slightly and only confirmed it after taking a closer look. "Yes. That is the black gold meteorite iron. It was left from forging a glove previously. I'm afraid other blacksmiths did not notice and ended placing it in the ordinary materials." The warden could not help but feel a pinch in his heart. The grade of that black gold meteorite iron was extremely superior. It was just that it looked basically the same as black iron, and one would not even be able to tell the difference if he or she was not an expert. Although they looked the same, there was a world of difference in their prices. The price of a slab of black gold meteorite iron could buy hundreds of thousands of tons of black iron, and even the sword spirit workshop only had a few slabs of it. Usually, such precious materials would be kept well, but someone did not notice and took it as ordinary black iron, placing it in the pile of materials. Although it was just the size of a palm, it was already worth a fortune. "I'll let her know." The in-charge looked at the elderly rather apologetically. That black gold meteorite iron was probably over tens of thousands of Xianming points. "Forget it. Since you let her select the materials herself, how can there be a reason to ask for the item back?" The elderly waved a hand as curiosity emerged in his eyes. It was just unknown whether this little girl identified the black gold meteorite iron correctly or treated it as black iron. The in-charge retreated to a side and could not help but feel vexed. The black gold meteorite iron was extremely previous. Although Yi Qingtang did surprise them with her embedding previously, embedding was not forging. Truly forging a weapon from raw material was way more complicated than embedding. If such a wonderful black gold meteorite iron was ruined by this girl, wouldn't it be a pity? Helplessly. The elderly had already laid his words, and no matter how unwilling the in-charge was, he could only bear with it at that moment. The in-charge was gloomy, but on the other hand, Yi Qingtang was exceptionally delighted. She did not expect to find such an amazing treasure like the black gold meteorite iron in the pile of materials. Although it was indeed small, it should be enough to forge a dagger after heating it. Picking up such a huge bargain for nothing, Yi Qingtang's heart no longer ached over the 1,000 Xianming points spent. 1,000 Xianming points in exchange for a slab of black gold meteorite iron. Was there even a better deal on earth? Delightedly, Yi Qingtang directly placed the black gold meteorite iron into the furnace to heat it and turned around to pick up a few spirit crystals. Chapter 357, Blinding Forging Skills. 3. The in-charge and the elderly thought Yi Qingtang was going to embed spirit crystals into the new weapon again and were instantly on alert. They found the effect of embedding the spirit crystals into the demonic blood sword fascinating and were going to look carefully this time. However, Yi Qingtang suddenly took out a thick cloth and wrapped the spirit crystals. Afterward, she picked up the hammer on the anvil and pounded on the bag of spirit crystals heavily. A sharp, crisp sound pierced the ears of the in-charge and the elderly. What is she doing? The elderly watched in astonishment as Yi Qingtang continuously smashed the spirit crystals into pieces with a hammer. Could it be that the spirit crystals are too huge? The black gold meteorite iron she chose just now is not able to embed many spirit crystals, but crushing them and selecting a few small ones is possible, said the in-charge seriously while casting his belittlement away. As the two were caught in curiosity, Yi Qingtang had already hammered numerous times, and the entire bag was pounded relatively flat. Seeing that it was about done, she finally unwrapped the bag. The spirit crystals that were initially about the size of a fingernail were already crushed into tiny pieces which twinkled brightly under the glow of the fire. The elderly looked at the spirit crystals that were almost in powder form and cast a look at the in-charge who was speaking seriously. There was a slightly awkward expression on the in-charge's face. It was already crushed to this state. How could it be used to embed a weapon? I was ignorant. I really cannot tell what this disciple wants to do, the in-charge said rather embarrassedly. The elderly did not say anything much. His curiosity was piqued by every action Yi Qingtang took. She was clearly forging a weapon, and the processes were similar, but he was still unsure exactly what Yi Qingtang wanted to do. The black gold meteorite iron that was thrown into the fire was already burned red, and its edges already softened under the high temperature. Why is she still not removing it? If she still doesn't remove it, the black gold meteorite iron is really going to turn into molten iron. The elderly furrowed his brows slightly. The liquid molten iron could be poured into a mold to fix the shape. Although it could be formed into the shape of a weapon directly, it was missing countless hammerings. Without repeated hammering, the ductility of the black gold meteorite iron would be greatly reduced. This girl is quite young. I reckon she does not have enough arm strength. It doesn't seem possible for her to hammer a complete piece of black gold meteorite iron into shape, the in-charge said as a matter of fact. Apart from the forging techniques, blacksmiths were more particular about their arm strength. After all, the iron hammers they used were as heavy as 100 jin. To slowly hammer a slab of metal into shape, the minimum number of hammerings required would already reach tens of thousands of strokes, and each stroke had to be fully supported with the arm strength. While this little girl may have some skills, arm strength was not something that could be trained in a day. The elderly thought that he had a point as well but did not say anything and continued observing. Yi Qingtang watched the red iron turn into molten iron, and her lips curled into a smile. Swiftly holding onto the bag of spirit crystal powder, she poured them into the molten iron in the high temperature. As the glistening powders were poured into the molten iron, the blazing red flames engulfed them in an instant. The eyes of the elderly and in-charge almost popped out at the sight. She actually mixed the spirit crystal powder into the black gold meteorite iron? What was this move? Chapter 358, Blinding Forging Skills. 4. The in-charge was utterly dumbfounded. He had been forging items for many years and was also a rather famous blacksmith who had produced quite a number of divine weapons. But, Wuxia world! Sight, he had never seen someone forging like that. Seeing that it was about done, Yi Qingtang removed the molten iron and allowed it to cool. Before the black gold meteorite iron was fully cooled, it could still be shaped. Yi Qingtang immediately hammered the deformed slab of black gold meteorite iron. Sparks flew with every hammer. Yi Qingtang hammered at an extremely fast speed and with enough force. In just a moment, she had already hammered 100 times. Even the elderly and the in-charge, who secretly observed her, were amazed by the accuracy and strength of her hammering. Putting everything aside, her hammering skills alone had already exceeded their expectations. Her skills were probably better than most of the blacksmiths in the sword spirit workshop. What is this girl's background? Looking at how steady her hammering is, it seems like the skills of someone who has been forging armaments for decades. The more the elderly watched, the more surprised he was. The little girl before him clearly looked only around 10 or so years old, and even if she had been making weapons since young, her techniques should not be this polished. She has already hammered about 1,000 times. Why is she still not preparing to shape the black gold meteorite iron? The in-charge was at a loss as well. He watched Yi Qingtang hammer the metal for some time, and although her actions were sharp and nimble, that slab of black gold meteorite iron was nowhere near being stretched into a weapon and was still a dark, black block of metal. Yi Qingtang did not notice the peeping eyes behind her and was only focused on the black gold meteorite iron before her. She originally wanted to find a material that was not so bad in quality and forge a small weapon with it. However, she did not expect to actually find such a treasure. Would it not be a waste if she did not make use of it well? Since she got a bargain, of course she had to make the best out of it. After hammering for 1,000 times, Yi Qingtang threw the black gold meteorite iron into the furnace once again. Wiping the sweat off her forehead, she took out some spirit crystals again and crushed it using the method she did previously. The elderly and in charge were dumbfounded. Yi Qingtang repeatedly heated the black gold meteorite iron into molten iron, added spirit crystal powder, and hammered it patiently. That was just like. She wanted to fully combine the spirit crystal powder with the black gold meteorite iron. Oh my lord! This girl is rather strange. The in-charge hit his forehead and was increasingly alarmed the more he watched. Wuxia World. Sight he, as well, knew about combining other items. However, the quality of most combined items was close to the base material itself, as it was not too difficult to combine two different items if they had similar qualities. However, the black gold meteorite iron and spirit crystals had two completely different qualities, and to completely combine them was simply unimaginable. To combine it well, the number of times to hammer would be multiplied a few times, and it was definitely not a small job. Furthermore, whether they could be perfectly combined was not certain. Thus, normal blacksmiths never dared to take such a risk. If the materials were unable to combine completely, the black gold meteorite iron was going to be completely wasted. Yi Qingtang felt that it was about done after repeatedly adding spirit crystals 3 times. After combining it the final time, Yi Qingtang started to stretch the entire block of black gold meteorite iron, which was slowly forged into the shape of a dagger. Chapter 359, Master of Forging, 1. As the clanging sound spread within the sword spirit workshop, the elderly and in-charge's gaze started to burn. At that moment, the two people, like kids with a strong thirst for knowledge, had their eyes fixed on Yi Qingtang, who gradually forged that block of black gold meteorite iron into an extremely sharp dagger. Time ticked away. Absorbed in forging, Yi Qingtang seemed to have lost track of time. She placed the newly made dagger into the cold water to cool it for the final time, and when she took it out, its black blade shone with subtle brilliance. It seemed as though a dark sky full of stars had transformed into this dagger, which was about the length of a forearm. It's pretty good looking. Yi Qingtang grinned at the dagger made by combining spirit crystal powder. With the pure black gold meteorite iron as the base and crystal powder shining through it, its appearance was extremely beautiful. After all the processes were done, Yi Qingtang finally heaved in relief. She placed the demonic blood sword and the dagger before her separately. The strengthening of the demonic blood sword went without saying, but the dagger was an unexpected surprise. Exchanging so many babies with 1,000 Xianming points was really a huge profit. After admiring them for a while, she kept the 2 weapons and was prepared to leave. However, only when she turned around did she realize that the in-charge of the sword spirit workshop and that elderly had been standing a distance away behind her from some time ago, and their eyes were on her. It seemed that they had been watching for quite some time. Yi Qingtang was slightly alarmed. The forging technique she used previously had not appeared up to date. The method of embedding spirit crystals into weapons was only circulated by a blacksmith master months later, while the technique of combining crushed spirit crystals into materials was discovered only 100 years later. According to the current knowledge of forging techniques, whatever she did was simply incomprehensible. But thinking from another perspective, it was not a big deal to use a method that no one knew of. At that thought, Yi Qingtang finally sighed in relief. She looked up to check the time and realized. Unknowingly, she had spent nearly 10 hours in the sword spirit workshop, which exceeded the 6 hours that the in-charge had set initially by quite a bit. The in-charge had an arrogant attitude, and it might have been a misconduct to exceed her time limit by 4 hours. However, there were not many Xianming points in her hands, and if the in-charge ordered her to make up for the extra time she spent, she did not have any remaining Xianming points to do so. I apologize for not noticing the time, Yi Qingtang said rather awkwardly to the in-charge. The in-charge suddenly returned to his senses and scanned Yi Qingtang with a weird expression. However, he did not dare to show his emotions with the elderly beside him and only feigned composure. It's fine. The Sword Spirit Workshop is not an apathetic place. So be it if you exceeded the time. The in-charge spoke generously, but he completely did not mind Yi Qingtang using 4 additional hours. If possible, he wished Yi Qingtang would forge a few more weapons for him to watch to his heart's content. Yi Qingtang was at a loss. The Sword Spirit Workshop was not an apathetic place. It was her first time hearing it in both her current and previous lives. If this were circulated, the Xianling sect disciples' chins would probably drop in shock. Who was not aware that the Sword Spirit Workshop had the most rules? Yi Qingtang could not understand why the in-charge suddenly changed his attitude. Since she was not required to supplement additional Xianming points, she was obviously happy to be saved from additional trouble. Chapter 360, Master of Forging, 2. The in-charge saw that Yi Qingtang seemed to be leaving and immediately looked at the elderly beside him. The elderly man had a complicated expression. After remaining silent for some time, he suddenly walked up and asked, "Can I take a look at the 2 weapons you forged just now?" Yi Qingtang exceeded her allotted time and was not in a position to reject his plea. Thus, she took both the dagger and the demonic blood sword out. The in-charge walked forward and held the weapons cautiously with a stunned expression in his eyes. Placing the 2 weapons before the elderly man, the 2 people looked on agitatedly as though they were looking at precious treasures. Wuxia world. Sight staring at the weapons, the elderly man gently brushed his old hand against the 2 weapons. The demonic blood sword emitted a cold air while some remaining warmth still remained in the dagger. Look, the air of the demonic blood sword and the spirit crystals in it are combined perfectly. There's actually no damage to the sword at all, and its aura is strengthened instead. The elderly man looked at the demonic blood sword with infatuation. The in-charge nodded repeatedly. Yes, indeed. I've never seen such a technique before. Look at this dagger. The elderly man held the dagger and drew a few strokes in the air, and a sound akin to a dragon's roar passed by their ears as the dagger glistened. The elderly's eyes brightened suddenly. Good. The eyes of the in-charge were narrowed in enchantment. Standing from aside, Yi Qingtang watched the 2 old men who were overflowing with energy like kids, and the corners of her lips twitched a little. This in-charge was like a completely different person. However, Yi Qingtang could not say anything as well. After all, she picked up a block of black gold meteorite iron here, and if she fussed about it with the in-charge, she would probably not be able to bring the dagger back with her. It was good that only admiration filled the eyes of the in-charge and elderly, and they did not seem to make things difficult for her. After looking at the weapons for quite some time, they finally returned them rather unwillingly to Yi Qingtang. "Little girl, what's your name?" The elderly could not help but ask after returning the weapons to Yi Qingtang. However, this question shocked the in-charge, who also looked at Yi Qingtang differently. Yi Qingtang did not think much and replied. I am Yi Qingtang. Yi Qingtang, the elderly ran a hand through his beard as he took a glance at Yi Qingtang with narrowed eyes. Initially, I couldn't tell that you actually know so many forging techniques at such a young age. Since you like it, you can visit the Sword Spirit Workshop more frequently in the future. Don't waste your talent in forging armaments, Wuxia World. Sight Yi Qingtang nodded but was clearly aware that she did not have many extra Xianming points to spend here. The two weapons were enough for her right now, and unless her skills increased by a great extent, she probably would not visit the Sword Spirit Workshop within a short period of time. The elderly and in charge did not say anything else, and Yi Qingtang left after bidding her goodbyes. Once Yi Qingtang left, the elderly finally laughed. This girl has some talent in forging. If she comes again in the future, just let her forge. Yes, replied the in-charge respectfully. Admiration emerged in his eyes as well. I have never expected there to be someone with such a talent in forging in the inner sect. Her techniques are relatively skilled, and I've never seen her method of using spirit crystals to forge weapons. From what you saw, what do you think of her forging abilities? The elderly asked. After a moment of hesitation, the in-charge finally spoke. Perhaps almost on par with mine. The elderly man was slightly shocked at his words. The in-charge of the Sword Spirit Workshop appeared rather casual, but if his name was revealed, everyone in the world probably knew about him. You're saying that her forging abilities can be said to be of a master's standards? Chapter 361, Master of Forging, 3, the in-charge forced a smile. She only forged one finished weapon today, but the skills she displayed are no worse than mine. I wonder who her master is. Perhaps, only a Grand Master is able to teach such a genius. The elderly's eyes deepened at the words. Everyone thinks that the level of one's martial skills will enable them to attain a different status. However, regardless of forging or refining pills, one would not have any other concerns if they reached the level of a Grand Master, as powerful figures would offer their services to obtain the items they produced. I wonder how Yi Qingtang's cultivation is currently. If there's nothing outstanding, she could focus on forging armaments. With her talent, it is not impossible to reach the level of a Grand Master, the in-charge mumbled. In this world, it was extremely rare for people to reach the state of a Grand Master, and only a few were successful in the past 1,000 years. And those few people had average cultivations, but any random divine weapons they produced could attract a group of people offering their services. No matter how powerful the mighty figures were, they would still seek an exceedingly strong weapon, and thus, Grand Masters were people who they had to treat politely the most. It seems that I need to make a trip to the inner sect's elders' hall. The elderly rubbed his beard as he thought. If Yi Qingtang really had the ability to become a Grand Master of forging, she would no longer be as simple as an ordinary disciple to Xianling's sect. If Xianling's sect could raise a Grand Master, it would have an exceptional significance. At that thought, the elderly did not stay any longer in the Sword Spirit Workshop and left immediately. Yi Qingtang, who exited the Sword Spirit Workshop, did not realize how lucky she was today as she joyously hugged her demonic blood sword and dagger all the way back to her residence. In the yard, Fei Ying was cleaning up the fallen leaves and immediately greeted Yi Qingtang when he saw her. Are you in a very good mood today, miss? Fei Ying blinked at Yi Qingtang. Yi Qingtang chuckled and nodded. Suddenly recalling something, she opened her space ring and took some items out. Tell N.I. Shang to come here. Fei Ying nodded and immediately called for N.I. Shang. When Yi Qingtang saw the two young teens standing before her, she finally placed the items that she just took out into their hands. No matter what your identities are currently, according to your talents, you will not remain here forever as long as you cultivate diligently from now on. Yi Qingtang handed Fei Ying and N.I. Shang two basic cultivation techniques which, although were not considered rare, were the most suitable for their age. Only by laying a strong foundation from young would there be better effects in one's cultivation in the future. Apart from cultivation techniques, Yi Qingtang also handed them a few bottles of Shi spirit pills. These were all exchanged when she was in the outer sect. Now that she had the soul condensation pills after entering the inner sect, the she spirit pills were naturally no longer suitable for her. Disbelief filled the eyes of the two kids as they looked at the pile of items in their hands. The identity of a sword boy or attendant girl was equivalent to that of servants in the inner sect. To guard against their sword boy and attendant girl from developing, many disciples never allowed them to have too much contact with things related to martial skills, much less take the initiative to give them cultivation techniques and elixirs. "Miss, we cannot accept these items." Ni Sheng frantically shook her head and returned the items to Yi Qingtang. Fei Ying, similarly, was overwhelmed by this unexpected favor and was a little frightened. Chapter 362, Mission 1, Yi Qingtang would never treat the people around her poorly. After entering the inner sect in her previous life, the sword boy and attendant girl appointed to her treated her pretty well, and that was a slight portion of warmth she received in the sect. However, those two kids were probably not yet 10 right now and had not been selected by the sect. She was not powerful enough in her previous life and could not do anything for them. Meeting Fei Ying and Ni Sheng this time was considered a kind of fate. In her previous life, Fei Ying was able to become an official inner sect disciple through his own talent, and what she did merely won her a favor. Rather, it was Ni Sheng. She had never heard anything about Ni Sheng in her previous life, but she could tell that Ni Sheng's talent was not any lower than Fei Ying's from these few days. Yet somehow, she did not manage to become an official disciple in her previous life. The two kids still wanted to reject the gifts but were forced to accept them by Yi Qingtang. With a pile of items in their hands, Fei Ying and Ni Sheng were both surprised and delighted. They thanked her continuously and engraved this precious favor of hers in their hearts. It was really their blessing to be able to meet such a nice person like Yi Qingtang. Yi Qingtang waved a hand for them to continue with their work. There was not much work in the courtyard on usual days, and the two kids were idle most of the time. As a sword boy, Fei Ying could exchange a few moves with Yi Qingtang. However, Yi Qingtang's method of cultivation was not similar to that of normal people. Thus, she rarely allowed Fei Ying to practice with her. Rather than letting the two of them waste their time, allowing them to cultivate and improve their skills in their spare time was much better. With a weapon she adored, Yi Qingtang would naturally not neglect her cultivation. A month passed in the blink of an eye. Apart from giving the two kids some guidance in their cultivation, most of her time was spent on upgrading herself. The spirit energy in the inner sect was much richer than the outer sect, and this was more nourishing for Yi Qingtang's spirit root. After entering the inner sect for a month, new disciples were required to begin accepting sect missions. However, before that, Yi Qingtang had already accepted 2 rewarded missions by herself and earned quite a lot of Xianming points, which she used to cultivate in the Spirit Consonance River. It was a coincidence that her first sect-appointed mission was actually together with the Blood Moon sect elder. When the Blood Moon sect elder saw Yi Qingtang, there was a subtle change in his expression, and it was not as resistant as before. Some outer sect disciples have not returned from their sect mission within the stipulated timing. The sect wants me to take a look. Yi Qingtang looked at the mission scroll, and when she thought of the word disappearance, her eyes fell on the Blood Moon sect elder. The mass disappearance of disciples from different sects was mostly related to the Blood Moon sect's resurrection. However, the disappearance situation stopped afterward. Now that there was another disappearance case 2 months later, Yi Qingtang could not help but suspect whether it was related to the Blood Moon sect. The Blood Moon sect elder was rather annoyed by Yi Qingtang's stare. "Don't look at me. I've always been in Xianling sect during this period of time, and even if a disciple did disappear, it has nothing to do with me. Even if he wanted to, there was no opportunity." Moreover, with Yi Qingtang's threat and temptation using the source of the marrow pill and bonded soul pill, how would he act recklessly under her watch? "I know it's not you. I'm just asking if you have any clues," Yi Qingtang said. The Blood Moon sect elder replied. "How would I have any clues? Everyone from the Blood Moon sect had their souls sealed back then, and most of them were scattered everywhere. how would I be able to know anything? Yi Qingtang was troubled over the matter as well and was more vigilant. If this incident was really related to the Blood Moon sect, there was nothing bad about the Blood Moon sect elder following along. Chapter 363, Mission 2. This time, Yi Qingtang's mission location was at the Floating Light Canyon, which was some distance away from Xianling sect. Traveling to and fro would take at least 1 month. After making some preparations, the two of them set off immediately. In the Floating Light Canyon, a few figures shuffled through the dense forest in a panic. They were dressed in the Xianling sect's outer sect uniform, but at that instant, these sect disciples no longer had the arrogance and distinguished air around them as before, with dirt and wounds covering their bodies. The Wind Sword sect people probably would not be able to catch up so quickly. Let's take a rest for now. A Xianling sect disciple panted. The dirt on his face could not cover his pale complexion. The other people slowly stopped after hearing that, and they panted with an ugly expression. The 7 people were all Xianling sect's outer sect disciples and had received a sect mission a month before. After heading to the Floating Light Canyon, the entire mission was completed relatively successfully. However, no one had expected that they would actually encounter an accident when they were about to return. A pale Su Wan was in the team as well. She pursed her lips lightly and looked towards Lu Xiuwen, who was frowning and breathing unsteadily. Senior brother Lu, will the people from the Wind Sword sect still chase after us? Lu Xiuwen's expression was very ugly at that moment. This was the first sect mission he accepted after recovering from the injury, yet unexpectedly, he was met with such a setback. Then, Lu Xiuwen did not reply to Su Wan and rather looked at another disciple in the team. That disciple was tall and handsome, but his expression was extremely ugly at that instant with wounds all over his body. It could be said that his injuries were the most severe amongst the 7 of them. Qiao Mo, this incident started because of you. With things as such, shouldn't you give us an explanation? Lu Xiuwen threw his words coldly. His voice attracted the attention of other people in the team. The reason for having to go in hiding in the Floating Light Canyon so miserably was something done by that disciple called Xiao Mo, junior brother Lu. This was just an accident. Junior brother Qiao did not wish for this either. Don't say any more already. What is most important right now is to flee from this place, a disciple mediated. Lu Xiuwen scoffed as he looked at the pale Qiao Mo accident. If he did not offend the Wind Sword sect disciples for nothing, why would they attack us? Furthermore, it was originally their own business, but he did not know what was good for him and had to join in. Now that he stirred up such a huge matter, why do we have to suffer together with him? Lu Xiuwen's words were relatively harsh, and Qiao Mo's expression turned even uglier. The Wind Sword sect and they usually stayed out of each other's way. Nothing happened initially when they met, but Qiao Mo happened to see his fiancée in the group of Wind Sword sect disciples. As the two groups passed by each other, he caught sight of the young lady joking with a Wind Sword sect disciple flirtatiously, which infuriated him immediately. He reasoned with them, but both parties were angered as they argued and ended up in a physical brawl. The number of Wind Sword sect disciples was double of theirs, and when they fought, the 7 people from Xianling sect naturally were not the Wind Sword sect's opponents. In the end, the Xianling sect disciples were still unable to escape after being cornered in the Floating Light Canyon by the Wind Sword sect disciples for days. Chapter 364, Mission 3, You don't have the skills, but you still stirred up these troubles. Qiao Mo, if you are a man, you should answer for your own acts and admit your mistakes to the Wind Sword sect people. Don't implicate us. Lu Xiuwen's brows were tightly furrowed as displeasure filled him. Qiao Mo hung his head low. He was the most severely injured and was extremely vexed over implicating his fellow senior and junior brothers. After being incited by Lu Xiuwen, Qiao Mo straightened himself with difficulty and said, Junior brother Lu is right. I should answer for my own acts. I'll look for the Wind Sword sect people right now. Seeing that Xiao Imo was about to leave while struggling with all the injuries, the other disciples stopped him immediately. What do you mean answering for your own acts? We are all Xianling sect disciples and are senior and junior brothers. Deep down, everyone was aware that although the conflict was started because of Xiao Imo, the sect's prestige was at stake right now. If Xiao Imo were to be handed over, what would become of them? Pieces of trash that betrayed a fellow disciple to ensure their own safety. Lu Ziyuan's expression turned colder. He did not intend to waste any time here. An outer sect elder recently thought highly of him, and he learned quite a number of cultivation techniques, which improved his skills greatly. This delay would waste so much time that could have been used to upgrade himself. Senior brother Lu's words have some reason in them. The number of us is fewer than that of the Wind Sword sect. If they don't retreat, God knows how long we will be surrounded here for. It is already past the mission submission deadline. If we return any later, I'm afraid we would all be punished. Su Wan echoed after Lu Xiuan. Over this period of time, Su Wan witnessed Lu Ziyuan's improvement, and she was naturally more hopeful. Given Lu Ziyuan's improvements, it seemed that he probably had a chance of becoming an inner sect disciple in the inner sect assessment next year. As the group was arguing, a few figures suddenly appeared. I was still wondering where you all hid. So it is here. A tall young man who was donned in the Wind Sword sect's outer sect uniform walked with large strides towards the group with over 10 Wind Sword sect disciples following behind him. The appearance of the Wind Sword sect disciples caused the Xianling sect disciples to be on full alert. What do you all want to do? A Xianling sect disciple asked in a low tone. What do we want to do? The leader of the Wind Sword sect disciples scoffed. He scanned the faces of the people from Xianling sect, and his eyes eventually fell on Xiao Imo. You Xianling sect disciples do not have any manners and are actually asking me what I want to do now. He offended a disciple of my sect. Has Xianling sect never taught you how to settle this matter? Xiao Mo's expression was a little ugly. He looked at the blustering and truculent Wind Sword sect people and then looked back at the miserable appearance of his fellow disciples. He clenched his fist silently and took a step forward. I was the perpetrator. If you have anything, just come at me. The Wind Sword sect disciple raised a brow at Xiao Imo and cackled instantly. You have some sense of responsibility. My requirements are not high. His eyes sharpened. Suddenly, he lifted the hem of his clothing and stepped on a stump with his left foot. Tapping his thigh, he laughed with an ill intention. As long as you crawl between my legs and admit your mistake with 3 kowtows, this matter can be considered to be over. I'll bring my people away immediately and allow you all to leave the floating light canyon. The expressions of all Xianling sect disciples were extremely ugly upon hearing the Wind Sword sect disciple. Scoundrel! You're going too far. Chapter 365, Mission 4, Go Too Far. The Wind Sword sect disciple scoffed. The moment he finished his sentence, the group of Wind Sword sect disciples people immediately drew out their swords, which gleamed threateningly. Is it just an apology from him or all of you seeking death together? The choice is all up to you. Do you think we are really afraid of you? Let's fight if that's what you want. A Xianling sect disciple took it upon himself to draw out his sword in preparation for a fight. Other disciples, similarly, drew out their swords and made their stand clear. Looking at his fellow disciples who fully supported him, Xiao Mo's eyes reddened, touched by the bonds of his fellow disciples. Wuxia World. Sight, you said you'll let all of us go as long as I apologize. Xiao Imo took a deep breath. A man should have dignity and not bow down, not to mention the insult of crawling between one's legs. However, this incident was started because of him, and his fellow disciples were already suffering together with him. Since they had the heart of protecting him, how could he drag them into danger? That's right. I live up to my words. As long as you apologize obediently, we Wind Sword sect disciples are not unreasonable, the Wind Sword sect disciple said with a raised brow. The Xianling sect disciples looked at Qiao Imo in shock, and their faces were agitated. Junior brother Qiao, you must not do it. How could they tolerate others insulting their fellow disciple right before their eyes? As everyone was about to persuade Qiao Imo, Lu Xiuwen suddenly spoke. It cannot be better that Qiao Imo knows clearly the right thing to do and the principles to follow. Senior brothers, why bother going against Qiao Mo's painstaking decision? This was originally started by him, and now that he can shoulder everything by himself, what is there to not do? Lu Xiuwen. Shut up. A Xianling sect disciple glared at Lu Xiuwen angrily. If not for the situation, he would have really killed the heartless betrayer that is Lu Xiuwen. Senior brother Lu didn't say anything wrong. It was Qiao Imo who acted rashly and offended the Wind Sword sect disciple, which caused us to be in such a hopeless situation. Is there anything wrong if he apologizes now? Su Wan echoed. As the Xianling sect disciples argued amongst themselves, the Wind Sword sect disciples snickered as they watched the show. It seems that there are some logical people in Xianling sect as well. It was a casual sentence, but the sarcasm was exceptionally obvious. They were clearly disciples of the same sect, yet they persuaded a fellow disciple to be insulted in fear of being implicated. Such a thing would never happen in their Wind Sword sect. Everyone, my mind is set. I am the one who implicated everyone in this matter. Qiao Imo took a deep breath and walked forward, looking coldly at the Wind Sword sect disciple who lifted a leg and was waiting for him to crawl under. Junior brother Qiao, Wuxia World. Sight some Xianling sect disciples wanted to stop him, but Qiao Imo had already made up his mind. Shutting his eyes in resignation, he bent his knees and kneeled on the ground. The mockery in the Wind Sword sect disciples' eyes deepened as they waited for Qiao Imo to humiliate himself. However, as Qiao Mo's knees were about to touch the ground, there was a cold sensation on his knees suddenly. Qiao Imo opened his eyes in surprise and suddenly saw. A sword was placed across his knees, which supported his knees up straight. Shock flashed past Qiao Mo's eyes. He looked up and saw. A stunning girl in a Xianling sect uniform was standing beside him with a smile while the handle of that sword was in her hands. A man should have dignity and not bow down. How can our Xianling sect disciple kneel down so easily? A casual voice along with a cool breeze entered everyone's ears. On that exquisite face, her cherry-red lips were curled into an evil smile. Chapter 366, Mighty Senior Sister, 1, Who are you? The Wind Sword sect disciple saw that the outcome was about to be settled and did not expect such a thing to happen. That girl tilted her head slightly as her bright eyes glanced across the group of Wind Sword sect disciples. The Wind Sword sect disciple wanted to berate the girl but was suddenly stopped by his companion. Don't speak carelessly. That is Xianling sect's inner sect disciple. What? The Wind Sword sect disciple fixed his eyes on her. Although the girl was wearing Xianling sect's uniform, it was different from that of Qiao Mo's and the rest, with the most obvious difference being the embroidery that symbolized an inner sect disciple in front of her chest. This look caused the group of Wind Sword sect disciples to pale. Inner sect disciple. They were only a group of outer sect disciples from Wind Sword sect, and as sect disciples, how would they now know the world of differences between the inner and outer sect? It's Senior Sister Yi. A Xianling sect disciple recognized that girl with just a look and was shocked. It's Yi Qingtang. Senior Sister Yi. The moment the Xianling sect disciple saw Yi Qingtang, it was as though they saw a ray of light in their darkness of despair. Qiao Imo fell into a trance as he looked at Yi Qingtang with his mouth hung open. What are you still doing there? Do you want me to help you up? Yi Qingtang raised a brow at the absent-minded Qiao Imo. Qiao Imo stood up frantically and looked at Yi Qingtang with admiration and respect. The Blood Moon sect elder beside Yi Qingtang scanned the situation, and the corners of his lips tugged up. He still thought that the disappearance of these disciples was related to the Blood Moon sect, but now it seemed that they were just cornered by other sects' disciples. Senior Sister Yi. Seeing Yi Qingtang, an inner sect disciple, the Xianling sect disciples surrounded her as though they had found a mainstay and looked at her with eyes full of respect. Yi Qingtang nodded slightly. When she saw Lu Xiaowen and Su Wan, there was not a slight change in her expression. She merely glimpsed past them as though they were completely unacquainted. Yi Qingtang's sudden appearance caught both Lu Xiaowen and Su Wan by surprise. Especially when Xiao Mo and the rest surrounded Yi Qingtang with a look of admiration, Lu Ziyuan's face darkened in an instant. Yi Qingtang simply did not bother with Lu Xiaowen and Su Wan as her eyes were directly fixed on the Wind Sword sect disciples. What were you all doing just now? Yi Qingtang's tone was neither warm nor cold, but to the Wind Sword sect disciples, that emotionless voice was like a rumble of thunder that caused their hearts to quiver. No. Nothing much. Upon meeting Yi Qingtang, an inner sect disciple, all arrogance was gone in the Wind Sword sect disciples, who were previously blustering and truculent. Expressions of uneasiness were etched on their faces. They initially thought that these dumb fools from Xianling sect would definitely be toyed around by them. But who would expect that it would actually alarm Xianling sect's inner sect disciple? And how would they be unaware of the frightening skills that inner sect disciples possessed? Even if all of them went up against her together, it was probably not enough to restrain that one girl. Moreover, there was still another inner sect disciple beside her. Just these two people were enough for them to be unable to bear the consequences of failure. Nothing much. Yi Qingtang raised a brow as she took a glimpse at Xiao Mo, whose complexion had not recovered to normal. Chapter 367, Mighty Senior Sister, 2, Nothing much, and yet, you dared to make my Xianling sect disciple kneel to you? How bold of you! Yi Qingtang's voice deepened as she spoke. The coldness in her voice caused the Wind Sword sect disciples to break out in cold sweat in fear. It's not it. It's your Xianling sect disciples who started arguing with us first. Thus, we had a conflict. A Wind Sword sect disciple mustered his courage and said. This was also the truth in reality. Oh. Yi Qingtang glanced at a few Xianling sect disciples. What happened exactly? Xiao Mo and the rest obviously did not dare to conceal anything and recounted the incident fully without leaving out any details. After hearing the account, Yi Qingtang swept a look across the Wind Sword sect disciples' faces. It was a brief glance, but the look in her eyes caused goosebumps to rise on all the Wind Sword sect disciples. So, you want my junior brother to crawl between your legs and then kowtow to you in apology? Yi Qingtang said coldly, but when she finished her sentence, her eyes suddenly sharpened. She drew out her demonic blood sword angrily. The demonic blood sword which was just strengthened was dangerously imposing. The moment it left its scabbard, a cold air spread in the air. The Wind Sword sect disciples' legs wobbled in fear at the sight. This was the skill of an inner sect disciple. Before making a strike, they were already exuding such a terrifying and overbearing force. The Wind Sword sect disciples' faces paled instantly, and they did not even dare to let out a fart. Looking at Yi Qingtang, warmth spread in the hearts of Xiao Mo and the rest. Thinking about how they were tightly chased by the Wind Sword sect disciples for these few days, did they still dare to act so arrogantly to them with Senior Sister Yi here right now? Yi Qingtang's back view was originally tiny, but at that instant, it seemed extremely tall and large. Why? Are you bullying us because you think our Xianling sect is lacking? Yi Qingtang scoffed. The Wind Sword sect disciples were about to vomit in fear from Yi Qingtang's aura but did not dare to retort and only shook their heads violently. It was just a casual talk, yet how dare you corner my junior brothers and not let them go for days? How should I settle this score? Yi Qingtang narrowed her eyes. The Wind Sword sect disciples were so close to weeping. A casual talk. How was it a casual talk? It was clearly Xiao Mo who started the fight. Why did it seem like they intentionally stirred up trouble when Yi Qingtang said it? But they did not dare to argue at that instant. The other party was an inner sect disciple and was on a completely different level from them. When they saw inner sect disciples on usual days, all of them were extremely respectful and cautious. This senior sister over here. You can settle it however you want. The Wind Sword sect disciples were really frightened then. Yi Qingtang was not anxious to reply and instead turned around to look at Xiao Mo and the rest. How are your injuries? Their injuries were not severe and were mostly external injuries. It was just that they seemed rather miserable after being chased. They were about to speak, but Yi Qingtang turned around by herself and spoke to the Wind Sword sect disciples. You all caused my junior brothers to be so heavily injured and delayed their return to the sect to submit their mission. Of course, you all must compensate for their loss. The Wind Sword sect disciples' eyes were about to pop out. Heavily injured? How were they heavily injured? Xiao Mo and the rest were dumbfounded. Where did senior sister Yi see that they were heavily injured? Chapter 368, Mighty Senior Sister, 3. I've long heard that Wind Sword sect has many spirit pills, including the Elegant Moon pill which you all most likely have. Forget it. Each of you just has to compensate 2 bottles of the Elegant Moon pill, and this matter can be considered to be over, Yi Qingtang said with a smile. The Wind Sword sect disciples' faces darkened. The Wind Sword sect's Elegant Moon pill had similar effects as Xianling sect's She Spirit pill but was more effective. Outer sect disciples like them would only be given 3 bottles every month. Yi Qingtang shaved almost 1 month's quantity away from them. Why? Unwilling. Yi Qingtang looked at the Wind Sword sect disciples' hesitant faces and smiled faintly. She waved her demonic blood sword, and an aura was shot out from the blade. In just an instant, the sword aura swept across the forest nearby, and like a wave, all the trees within 100 meters away were chopped. A loud crashing sound pierced everyone's ears. Everyone stared at the flattened forest with their mouths hung ajar as cold sweat trickled down their foreheads. How terrifying was this power? Senior Sister Yi is so powerful. The Xianling sect disciples were in awe. So this was the ability of an inner sect disciple? After seeing the damage that Yi Qingtang did with just a light move, Lu Ziyuan's face darkened to an extreme instantly. Yi Qingtang actually became this powerful. How could this be? Previously, Lu Xiuan had never witnessed Yi Qingtang's skills during the inner sect assessment and was very skeptical of Yi Qingtang's entrance to the inner sect. However, personally seeing everything today, he suddenly realized that the distance between him and Yi Qingtang had unknowingly widened to a point that it was insurmountable. Even the Blood Moon sect elder beside Yi Qingtang could not help but secretly call her a monster after seeing her skills. It was just a month. How exactly did this girl improve so quickly? The skills of the current Yi Qingtang and when she was taking the inner sect assessment was also a world of differences. In reality, Yi Qingtang's skills improved by a large extent in this 1 month since entering the inner sect. The upgrading of her spirit root and the rich spirit energy in the inner sect allowed her skills to improve rapidly. Now, she had already surpassed Khanate level 9 and entered Martial Qi level 1, a completely unimaginable presence to the outer sect disciples. If you're unwilling, any one of you can come forward to receive 1 move from me. If you can withstand it, this matter can be settled. Yi Qingtang smiled at the Wind Sword sect disciples who were all a miserable shade of white while uttering something that threw them into utter despair. All color was drained from the Wind Sword sect disciples' faces. Who the hell would be able to withstand 1 move from her? Was this not seeking death? Then, no matter how unwilling they were, they could only submit. The group of Wind Sword sect disciples handed the Elegant Moon pills over gloomily. After collecting over 30 bottles of Elegant Moon pill, Yi Qingtang was slightly more satisfied. You all can scram now. The Wind Sword sect disciples did not dare to hang around any longer and fled off hurriedly. Watching them leave, Xiao Mo and the rest felt that their anger was avenged satisfyingly. Thank you, Senior Sister Yi. If not for you today, we would have been humiliated by them. Tears filled the Xianling sect disciples' eyes. It was only when they saw an inner sect disciple from their sect during a crisis and were saved from misery did it occur to them how precious their clothes that symbolized Xianling sect disciple were. Chapter 369, Mighty Senior Sister, 4. There was a smile in Yi Qingtang's eyes as she looked at the group of disciples. Temporarily leaving aside the fact that the disciples competed amongst each other within the sect, all of them were shouldering the same sect glory once they were out of the sect. We are from the same sect. There's no need to thank me, Yi Qingtang said with a smile. Afterward, she handed the Wind Sword sect disciples compensation of over 30 elegant moon pills to the leading disciple. These are Wind Sword sect's compensation to you all. Divide it amongst yourselves. The disciples shook their heads in a fluster. No, no, no. We cannot accept these, Senior Sister Yi. If not for you, we would have either died or been heavily insulted and injured. We cannot accept these items. Yi Qingtang looked at them funnily. Why can't you accept it? They compensated you all, not me. Furthermore, I only said a few sentences. You are all injured and are delayed by a few days. If not compensated well, you all would fall behind others. The disciples were at a loss of whether to laugh or cry. Senior Sister, those few sentences that you said then were the key. Calculating the price of these elegant moon pills and then the number of sentences that Yi Qingtang said, a single word from her was really almost worth 1,000 taels of gold. The group could not win over Yi Qingtang and could only accept it reluctantly, though their hearts were deeply filled with gratitude. Lu Xiuan and Su Wan had been lingering outside and did not near Yi Qingtang. It was as though the two of them were isolated by the group. Yi Qingtang naturally did not pay them any attention and took a leave first after leaving some instructions for the group. The mission this time was rather simple and unrelated to the Blood Moon sect. Everything was smooth. Yi Qingtang had just left, but the disciples had still not returned to their senses from Yi Qingtang's valiant and heroic bearing. As outer sect disciples, they rarely had chances to interact with inner sect disciples. To them, the words inner sect was unreachable and extremely mysterious. Senior Sister Yi is such a nice person. Xiao Imo scratched his head, and his eyes were filled with gratitude. Did you all see clearly just now? That one move from Senior Sister Yi was so domineering. A disciple was still absorbed in that one move that Yi Qingtang unleashed previously. Just looking at the many trees that were chopped, one could tell how frightening that sword aura was. Did Senior Sister Yi use the sword aura just now? Weren't only martial chi level 1s able to use it? Why do I remember that? Senior Sister Yi had only entered the inner sect for 1 month. The famous story of Yi Qingtang's entrance into the inner sect had long circulated in the outer sect, and the few of them were not unfamiliar with it. However, after seeing her in person today, they realized. Senior Sister Yi was way more domineering than the rumors had told her to be. Senior Sister Yi was able to advance from Khanate level 9 to martial chi level 1 in a month's time. She is indeed powerful and truly the disciple who entered the inner sect in the shortest time. If I have just 10% of her skills, I would be content already. Everyone was full of exclamation over Yi Qingtang's skills and did not notice that Lu Ziyuan's face was extremely somber. He had felt that he improved greatly in this 1 month, yet unexpectedly. Yi Qingtang's skills improved at a tremendous pace. With just that little improvement of his, it was an utter joke in comparison to Yi Qingtang. Su Wan looked at Lu Ziyuan's somber side profile and did not dare to say anything further. However, from the incident today, Su Wan realized. Yi Qingtang had long been at another level. Chapter 370, Rage, 1. Why did you just let the people from the Wind Sword sect go? The Blood Moon sect elder followed Yi Qingtang as she walked out of the floating light canyon. He suddenly had other thoughts in his mind. Yi Qingtang stopped and took a glance at the Blood Moon sect elder. source of the marrow pill. The Blood Moon sect elder was stunned as he heard the words. I just asked only, haha. He avoided Yi Qingtang's eyesight, but how he wished to strangle the girl in front of him. The Blood Moon sect elder felt depressed. Yi Qingtang joined the mission for the sect and the Xianming points. But what could he get? Nothing in the sect was attractive to him, especially the honor of the sect. He could only bear with it when Yi Qingtang suppressed him. Yi Qingtang rubbed her brows as she looked at the Blood Moon sect elder. The old guy would not even behave for a second. If she did not watch him tightly, he would definitely target others. The mission was smooth this time. Yi Qingtang did not wish to waste any time as she still needed to cultivate in the inner sect. She then rushed back to Xianling's sect. The Blood Moon sect elder returned to his yard gloomily when they returned to the sect. Yi Qingtang was amused by his expression and decided to refine some source of the marrow pills for him in the next few days. Yi Qingtang returned to her yard, but she realized that something was not right when she pushed open the gate of the yard. Since she provided Fei Ying and Ni Shang with basic cultivation technique previously, they would cultivate and practice all the time in the yard. However, the yard now was empty and messy. There was the smell of blood in the air. An uneasy feeling rose in her heart. She then rushed into the yard and saw pools of blood on the stone path at the center of the yard. The blood was dry now, but it still struck her eyes. Young lady, a weak voice came from the house at the side. Yi Qingtang looked towards the house, and she was totally stunned. Fei Ying, who was injured heavily, laid at the door, and his face was full of wounds. You are finally back. Young lady, Yi Qingtang felt uneasier as she looked at his injured body. She then noticed that Ni Shang was not around. She dashed towards Fei Ying and asked, Where is Ni Shang? Fei Ying shivered as he heard the question. Tears flowed out of his swollen eyes. He kneeled in front of Yi Qingtang and knocked his head on the ground constantly. Young lady, please, save Ni Shang, what happened? Yi Qingtang held Fei Ying's collar and dragged him up. Fei Ying was choked with sobs. Ni Shang was brought away by them. I was so useless. I couldn't protect her. Young lady, please, you are the only one who can save her now. Fei Ying told everything to Yi Qingtang slowly. After Yi Qingtang left for her mission, Fei Ying and Ni Shang used all the time to cultivate and guard the yard. They wanted to help Yi Qingtang to look after the silver wolf, but it disappeared one day. Both of them were nervous and worried about the silver wolf. However, danger approached them secretly. Chapter 371, Rage, 2. Though Ni Shang was still young, she was almost a fully grown girl with a pretty face. She was quite attractive among the attendant girls. Before Ni Shang was assigned to Yi Qingtang, some inner sect disciples would flirt with her. She did not dare to resist, and she was still young. The situation was better after she was assigned to Yi Qingtang. However, after Yi Qingtang left, the three disciples who liked to flirt with her came again with Song Juanqiu. The four inner sect disciples broke into Yi Qingtang's yard and kidnapped Ni Shang. Fei Ying wanted to stop them, but he was not strong enough to fight against them. He was beaten heavily until he fainted but still could not stop them. Young lady, I'm aware that we are just servants and that our lives worth nothing. But Ni Shang is always loyal. Please save her, Fei Ying begged Yi Qingtang constantly and kneeled onto the floor again. He ignored his injuries and knocked his head heavily onto the ground. The blood on his forehead was transferred onto the stone ground. Yi Qingtang took a heavy breath and asked, besides Song Juanqiu, who are the other three people? Fei Ying then said the names of the other three people. Yi Qingtang felt her brain almost explode after hearing the names. The names that Fei Ying said were the three inner sect disciples that he killed in her previous life. That was the reason why she did not hear of Ni Shang's name in her previous life. Ni Shang in her previous life most likely did not survive the incident and was tortured to death by the 3 disciples. Fei Ying was stimulated by Ni Shang's death, and his potential was discovered. He worked hard and became an inner sect disciple. He then tortured the 3 disciples to death. Everything now overlapped with the information from her previous life. Just this time, there was a Song Juanxiu. Young lady, please save her. As long as you are willing to save her, I will serve you for the rest of my life. Fei Ying continued begging. He was slightly younger than Ni Shang, and she always took care of him. He always treated Ni Shang as his sister. He hated himself the most when Ni Shang was humiliated. He hated his weakness and inability. He hated that he did not have the ability to protect her. He also knew that they were inferior compared to the disciples. Even though Yi Qingtang was their young lady, she did not have the duty to provoke other disciples for them. However, he had no other way. I understand now, Yi Qingtang narrowed her eyes and said slowly. She frowned heavily as her sight landed on Fei Ying, who was kneeling in front of her. Follow me. Yi Qingtang then walked out of the yard. Fei Ying was stunned and raised his head. His face was full of confusion. You better hurry up if you want to save her. Yi Qingtang's voice was cold but anxious. She did not know when Ni Shang was killed in her previous life. According to Fei Ying, Ni Shang was kidnapped 3 days ago. If they did not save her on time, she might. Fei Ying then realized what Yi Qingtang was going to do. He wiped off his tears and got up from the floor and caught up with Yi Qingtang. The Blood Moon sect elder who just left his yard suddenly saw Yi Qingtang. He wanted to escape instinctively, but Yi Qingtang was covered by a murderous look. Chapter 372, Rage, 3, The Blood Moon sect elder was shocked. What was going on? Why was she so fierce? Was she going to eat someone alive? The Blood Moon sect elder then followed them to figure out what was going on. Outside the practice hall, Song Juanxiu was with the 3 disciples. Their faces were very pleasant. That girl's growth is not bad at her age. She will be nicer after a few years. After a few years? I think her innocence now is just right. It is so satisfying to watch her begging me. The 3 disciples laughed, and their faces were full of contentment. Song Juanxiu sneered as he saw how filthy the people were. He did not care about the girl at all. He was involved just because Ni Shang was Yi Qingtang's servant. Song Juanxiu resented her so much every time he recalled how Yi Qingtang framed him and how he lost so many bottles of Song Juanxiu to Feng Moli. Now Yi Qingtang was not in the sect, there was no issue for inner sect disciples to punish her attendant girl. When the 3 people were discussing, Song Juanxiu noticed a person approaching. He narrowed his eyes and exchanged glances with the 3 people. The 3 of them stopped their discussion and looked towards the person. All 3 of them laughed. Isn't this our junior sister Yi? What happened to your sword boy? How come he is injured? It's a bit too harsh for you to treat your servant like this, one of the disciples smiled and said. His arrogant face appeared so disgusting. Fei Ying, who followed Yi Qingtang, wanted to go forward when he saw Song Juanxiu and the 3 people, but he was stopped by Yi Qingtang. Junior sister Yi, what are you so angry for? Song Juanxiu smiled, but his scornful sight glanced at Yi Qingtang. Where is Ni Shang? Fei Ying stared at them and asked. Song Juanxiu took a glance at Fei Ying and sneered. His eyes were full of disdain. He looked at Yi Qingtang and said, Junior sister Yi, where are your servant's manners? A mere sword boy dares to challenge your inner sect disciples. Yi Qingtang squinted her eyes and pulled Fei Ying back. She scanned through their faces, and she suddenly smiled. I had entered the inner sect for a month now. I heard that inner sect disciples could compete among ourselves. Senior brothers, are you willing to compete against me in the life and death ring? Yi Qingtang asked. Life and Death Ring. Song Juanqiu and the rest were stunned. The sect did not allow private fighting among the disciples, but there were always conflicts between disciples. To ban private fighting, there was a life and death ring in the inner sect. On the life and death ring, death was determined by destiny. Even if one were to die on the ring, no one would receive any punishment. However, fighting on the life and death ring needed to be approved by the inner sect wardens. Both parties had to sign the life and death agreement. Yi Qingtang just entered the sect for a month, and she dared to challenge them. Song Juanqiu and the rest laughed when they realized what she was talking about. Junior sister Yi, you want to go on to the life and death ring against 4 of us? Are you joking? Chapter 373, Life and Death Ring, 1. A new disciple who just entered the sect for a month challenged 4 people to fight on the life and death ring. Was she trying to commit suicide? Song Juanqiu sneered. He realized that she was trying to take revenge for An Shang. However, Wuxia World. Sight, did she not know her own abilities? How did she dare to be so arrogant? She was going to commit suicide. Fei Ying was stunned as well. He heard of the life and death ring as he spent quite a long time in the inner sect. He hated these 4 people, but he did not expect Yi Qingtang to want to fight against them on the life and death ring for An Shang. Fei Ying was a little bewildered. He held Yi Qingtang's sleeves, and he was very nervous. Miss, the martial qi level 1 had 4 heavens. Every heaven consisted of 3 stages. They had been in the inner sect for a few years. The 3 disciples were at the 2nd stage of the 1st heaven of martial qi level 1, and Song Juanqiu was at the 3rd stage. Yi Qingtang had only entered the inner sect for a month, and she just reached the 1st heaven of the martial qi level 1. She was at the 1st stage of the 1st heaven. There was a great difference in ability between her and the 3 disciples and a greater difference with Song Juanqiu. With every stage difference of the marital qi, the difference of the ability was immense. It was suicide for Yi Qingtang to challenge the 4 people on the life and death ring alone. I'm not joking. Do you dare to accept my challenge? Yi Qingtang looked at the 4 people seriously. They suddenly laughed. Of course we accept. Why not? Since you are so brave, we have to accept your challenge. Song Juanqiu smiled. Invite the warden over now. Since junior sister Yi has met the requirements, we must accept as her senior brothers, Song Juanqiu said to one of the disciples. The disciple immediately invited the warden over. The warden was surprised as he heard that Yi Qingtang wanted to challenge the 4 people at the same time on the life and death ring. The 5 of you, are you sure about it? The warden asked cautiously. He revealed a complex look as he turned towards Yi Qingtang. The life and death ring was a dangerous ring in the inner sect. There were some disciples who challenged others on the ring. But Yi Qingtang, as a new disciple, wanted to challenge 4 people at the same time. What nonsense! Yes. Yi Qingtang replied firmly. Then the 5 of you have to sign the life and death agreement. Whether you live or die on the ring will depend on your destiny, the warden said after seeing that his persuasion was not working. The 5 of them did not object and signed the agreement in front of the warden. Song Juanqiu was the last to sign. He sneered as he saw Yi Qingtang's name on the agreement. Wuxia World. Sight, he wanted to teach Yi Qingtang a lesson, but she was rushing to commit suicide. Even if they were to beat her to death on the ring, no one would say anything about them. The challenge will be 10 days later. You shall go to the life and death ring. The warden kept away the agreement and left a reminder. Song Juanqiu stared at Yi Qingtang in an evil way after the warden left. Junior sister Yi, I shall wait for you at the life and death ring 10 days later. Yi Qingtang narrowed her eyes. Wait, she suddenly said as Song Juanqiu and the rest were about to leave. Chapter 374, Life and Death Ring, 2. Song Juanqiu slowed down his path and turned to look at Yi Qingtang. Do you regret your choice now, junior sister Yi? Yi Qingtang sneered. Where is N.I. Shang? Song Juanqiu lifted his eyebrows and took a glance at Yi Qingtang. N.I. Shang. He then appeared to suddenly remember something and smiled. Are you talking about your servant girl? Don't be so nervous. We saw the potential of that girl, and that's why we brought her away to teach her. If you are concerned, I'll ask someone to send her back later. The other 3 disciples' faces changed. They had yet tasted the girl. How could she be returned to Yi Qingtang so soon? They were about to speak when Song Juanqiu glanced at them, and they had to remain silent. Thank you, senior brother Song, Yi Qingtang said. You're welcome. Song Juanqiu replied. From the start, Song Juanqiu was involved because of the grudge between them. Now that Yi Qingtang would face her destiny soon once she stepped onto the life and death ring, N.I. Shang was useless to him. Furthermore, even though some disciples would punish their attendant girls and sword boys in the inner sect, this could not be discussed openly. If the wardens or the elders found out about that, those disciples would be punished. They kidnapped N.I. Shang previously as Yi Qingtang was not back yet, and Fei Ying would not be able to see the wardens and the elders as a sword boy. That was why they dared to kidnap her. However, Yi Qingtang was back now. If they still held N.I. Shang, she might report the case to the wardens and the elders. They would face the consequence then. Do you have any other things, junior sister Yi? Song Juanqiu smiled and asked. Nope. Song Juanqiu smiled and left with the other 3 disciples. Fei Ying gritted his teeth as the 4 people walked away arrogantly. Young lady, you do not need to fight against them on the life and death ring. If we report to the wardens and the elders that they kidnapped N.I. Shang, they will be punished. Fei Ying felt gracious towards Yi Qingtang for rescuing them, but he was also worried for Yi Qingtang's safety. However, Yi Qingtang shook her head insistently. N.I. Shang was just an attendant girl. If they reported the case, Song Juanqiu and the rest would only receive light punishments. Furthermore, Song Juanqiu had some connections with one of the wardens in the inner sect. This was not the revenge that Yi Qingtang wanted. I will take revenge with my own hands, Yi Qingtang said and squinted her eyes. How could she let the people who dared to touch her people go? Fei Ying was in a complex mood as he stared at Yi Qingtang's face. The Blood Moon sect elder had witnessed the whole situation and figured out the whole story. Based on his understanding of Yi Qingtang, she would use her life to protect her people. Their abilities are above yours. Are you sure you are going to fight against them together on the life and death ring? The Blood Moon sect elder said. Yi Qingtang now was still weaker than the weakest person in the 4 of them. How could she win? You don't need to worry about this. Yi Qingtang replied. The Blood Moon sect elder was stunned. I would have never cared for you if you did not bribe me with the bonded soul pill. I wish you die as soon as possible. Yi Qingtang headed back after signing the life and death agreement. Not long after Yi Qingtang and Fei Ying returned to their home, N.I. Shang was sent back by Song Junqia's people. Chapter 375, Life and Death Ring, 3. But when Yi Qingtang saw N.I. Shang's current appearance, it was as though a huge rock was pressed on her chest, causing her to be so stifled that breathing was difficult. The usually petite and pretty girl was laying on bed breathlessly. Her tiny body was covered with bruises, and her clothes were already badly torn. Her fair face was discolored from the bruises, and there was a huge cut on her forehead of which blood flowed along her temples and stained the pillow under her head completely red. N.I. Shang. Fei Ying saw N.I. Shang's tragic appearance and broke down on the floor immediately. Yi Qingtang narrowed her eyes at N.I. Shang's situation, and her breathing deepened. Get out. Yi Qingtang ordered coldly. N.I. Shang sustained too many injuries, and if not treated immediately, she would be completely crippled even if she kept her life. Looking at Yi Qingtang's cold side profile, Fei Ying did not dare to hesitate and immediately left the room. He shut the door tight and collapsed against it. He clasped his hands tightly and placed it against his forehead as he prayed repeatedly. He was too useless and thus caused Shang to suffer such torture. He must become stronger. No matter what price he had to pay, he must obtain more power and never ever allow the people around him to suffer again. In the room, Yi Qingtang took out many elixirs from her space ring and swiftly checked Shang's injuries. Shang had countless internal and external injuries. Just looking at those hideous wounds, she did not dare to imagine what kind of torture and humiliation she suffered in these 3 days. Looking at Shang's current appearance, Yi Qingtang could not help but recall the young girl's shy smile when she nervously called her "Miss" on the first day they met. Yi Qingtang took a deep breath and forcefully suppressed the murderous intent in her heart. "Song Juanqiu, just you wait. I will definitely return this 100-fold." Yi Qingtang forced herself to calm down and used the spirit energy in her body to heal her injuries. She poured large amounts of elixirs into Shang's mouth without finding it a shame, all to ensure that Shang kept on to her last breath. After encountering this incident right after she returned, she was fully occupied from day to late night. Shang's condition finally stabilized a little. As her breathing gradually stabilized, her tightly shut eyes opened with difficulty. When her clear eyes were opened, terror and despair were written in her eyes as she let out a shrill cry. Don't touch me." Shang crawled up in fear. Trembling, she clutched on the blanket tightly and curled up in the corner of the bed. Her struggle caused the wound that had yet to heal to rip open once again, and gushes of blood stained the pure white bandage. Shang, it's me. Don't be afraid." Upon seeing Shang's terrified behavior, Yi Qingtang did her best to gently comfort Shang. Shang could not stop trembling in fear. After seeing that the person before her was Yi Qingtang, it was as though her body broke down entirely as her purpled lips quivered and parted slightly. "Me. Miss," large teardrops slid out from her eyes silently. Looking at Yi Qingtang, who was like the last straw to clutch at, she fell into Yi Qingtang's arms in despair. "Miss. You're back. You're finally back," a heart-wrenching voice escaped Shang's mouth. Chapter 376, Life and Death Ring, 4. Yi Qingtang lightly hugged the tiny frame that never stopped trembling, and her brows furrowed. "It's all over. I am back already. No one can ever harm you again." Shang clutched onto Yi Qingtang's clothes tightly and choked in between sobs. No one could imagine what kind of suffering she went through in these few days. Yi Qingtang's heart ached as she pacified the young girl. Rage gradually flamed up within her as she felt a warm sensation on her blouse due to Shang's tears. In the room, Shang's cries traveled out from the cracks of the door. Upon hearing Shang's heartbreaking cries, Fei Ying, who was sitting outside the door, felt as if a knife was pierced in his heart. He clenched his teeth and punched the hard rock ground. Even though his knuckles were bleeding badly, it never suppressed the excruciating pain in his heart. Shang cried for a long time. With her age, how difficult must it have been for her to go through those 3 days of torture? She mumbled the torture she experienced in these few days in choppy sentences. The more Yi Qingtang listened, the more the murderous feeling in her intensified. In her previous life, Shang did not meet Yi Qingtang and did not have the slightest ability to protect herself, thus ending up being tortured to death. But this time, the only lucky thing was that Shang was never really humiliated by those 3 bastards. Before this, the cultivation techniques that Yi Qingtang taught Shang protected Shang's last thread of dignity. While she was unable to escape, she resisted desperately and never allowed the 3 disciples to have their way, though the number of beatings she suffered from the resistance was not little. Shang was exhausted from crying, and her originally frail body could not support itself. Between sobs, she eventually fell into a deep slumber in Yi Qingtang's arms. However, there no longer was neither pain nor despair on Shang's face this time. She knew that Miss was back, and she was finally safe. Yi Qingtang gently settled Anai Shang in bed and left the room. There was a faint smell of blood outside. There were no emotions on her face when she saw Fei Ying, who collapsed outside the door, and his badly battered fists, which left a trail of blood on the ground. Do you hate it? Yi Qingtang asked with a low voice. Fei Ying looked down and nodded firmly. Become stronger then. Strong enough to protect the people around you and never let them suffer again. Otherwise, even if you kill yourself from the hatred, it would only be a joke to those people, Yi Qingtang said coldly. Fei Ying suddenly looked up. In the dark night, his bright yet sharp eyes were like knives from which the innocence belonging to a young teen was completely absent. Miss, I wish to become stronger. Yi Qingtang chuckled and nodded. I will teach you after the life and death ring. Before that, you must take good care of Anai Shang. Do you hear me? Yes. Fei Ying gave a firm nod, but worry suddenly emerged in his heart. Miss, that life and death ring, I know my limits. Afterward, Yi Qingtang returned to her own room. Anai Shang's injuries weighed heavily on Yi Qingtang's heart. She was clearly aware that her current skills were not considered the top amongst the inner sect disciples, but she must avenge Anai Shang without a doubt. There were still 10 days left. She must make a breakthrough in these 10 days. Otherwise, even if she went on the life and death ring, she would be the one who died. In her room, her eyes narrowed as she thought of the life and death ring that was going to happen 10 days later. 10 days. Chapter 377, Ice and Fire. 1. Yi Qingtang was only at the first stage of the first heaven in the martial qi level 1 realm, while Song Juanqiu was already at the third stage of the first heaven and was only a step away from entering the second heaven. To win against Song Juanqiu and the rest on the life and death ring, the only option for her was to break through to the second heaven state in these 10 days. However, to advance an entire realm in such a short span of time was easier said than done. Yi Qingtang was able to achieve remarkable improvements on the eve of the inner sect assessment back then by relying on the effects that the upgrade of her spirit root brought. Yi Qingtang realized that every time her spirit root was improved, her abilities would increase by leaps and bounds. Currently, she was already an orange spirit root, and while the inner sect was rich in spirit energy, she could clearly feel that the advancement of her spirit root was gradually slowing. The higher the spirit root was, the harder it was to nourish it. The reason she came to Xianling sect was for the Black Heaven water in Xianling sect's mystic realm, which the Palace Lord of the Antiquity Palace talked about the other day. Only the Black Heaven water could allow her spirit root to improve at a faster speed. It was just that there were still months to the start of the mystic realm, and only highly ranked disciples in the inner sect have the qualifications to enter. Given Yi Qingtang's current position in the inner sect, she would probably not have the qualification to enter even if the mystic realm opened. She only had 10 days worth of time then. Yi Qingtang narrowed her eyes as she pondered over the methods which could increase her skills rapidly. Her eyes swept across the room but realized a familiar figure was missing. Xiao Guai. Astonished, Yi Qingtang stood up and searched around her courtyard to no avail, with only the little lightning dragon laying on the bed dejectedly. She only found out from Fei Ying that the silver wolf disappeared unknowingly after she left, and they could not find it despite days of searching. What is going on exactly? Yi Qingtang's brows were furrowed tightly. When she was in the outer sect, she had entrusted the silver wolf under Qin Huan's care as well when she went out on a mission, but when she returned, Qin Huan said the silver wolf disappeared. It was just that Yi Qingtang thought Qin Huan was blabbering nonsense when she saw the silver wolf. Yet, unexpectedly, the silver wolf actually disappeared again. Yi Qingtang found it strange but could not see any traces of the silver wolf. The life and death ring was going to happen 10 days later, and she could not be distracted to search for it right now. Furthermore, Fei Ying had to take care of Anai Shang. Thus, she could only suppress the matter for the moment. She did not know whether it was an illusion or not, but she was not the slightest anxious, although she knew the silver wolf was nowhere to be found, as though she had a premonition somehow. The disappearance of the silver wolf was not because of any external factors but its own decision. Leaving the disappearance case aside, Yi Qingtang focused on the matter at hand. With her usual cultivation, breaking through from stage 1 of the first heaven to the second heaven in 10 days was almost impossible. Time was limited, and Yi Qingtang could only take another route. The next morning, Yi Qingtang dragged the drowsy Blood Moon sect elder up. "How many Xianming points do you still have?" Yi Qingtang suddenly asked. The Blood Moon sect elder was still half asleep as he looked at the number on his bracelet. "About 2,000. A large portion of the Xianming points was left by Zhou Chu. Since the Blood Moon sect elder did not find a use for anything, he had never touched it at all and even earned quite an amount from the mission with Yi Qingtang before. "Give it to me," Yi Qingtang said straightforwardly. "What?" The Blood Moon sect elder was slightly stunned. Yi Qingtang could not be bothered to explain anything and took out a bottle of the summoning soul pills. "Exchange or not?" Chapter 378, Ice and Fire, 2, Exchange. The Blood Moon sect elder's eyes flickered after seeing the summoning soul pill. Xianming points were only a string of numbers to him without any use, but the summoning soul pill was a baby. Then, the Blood Moon sect elder slid all his Xianming points to Yi Qingtang's bracelet and hugged that bottle of summoning soul pills with a blissful smile. With the 2,000 Xianming points from the Blood Moon sect elder and the few thousands she had, Yi Qingtang had nearly 6,000 Xianming points. Subsequently, she sprinted to the Xianming pavilion with the curious Blood Moon sect elder following right after. Yi Qingtang's arrival in the pavilion immediately drew the attention of many disciples. "Yi Qingtang. I heard that she issued a challenge on the life and death ring to Song Juanqiu and his 3 followers yesterday. Is it true? Can it not be? The life and death agreement was already signed. In my opinion, she is simply seeking death. She just entered the inner sect for a month yet dared to issue a challenge to 4 people. If that isn't seeking death, then what is? Why do I remember that Yi Qingtang is a red spirit root? It was already pretty strange when she entered the inner sect previously. Why is she stirring up trouble now? She is the only red spirit root in the inner sect, which is rather amazing if I were to say. However, she is a little overboard on this matter. What is her skill level now? She's at most stage 1 of the first heaven in martial chi level 1, but she actually dared to challenge them? Fighting against 4 people at one go. Is she really tired of living? Just an inflated ego. There was a clamor of discussion amongst the disciples. The news of Yi Qingtang challenging Song Juanqiu's clique had already circulated widely in the inner sect, provoking much noise. It could be said to be the biggest joke in the inner sect recently. Yi Qingtang walked into the Xianming pavilion without bothering about the discussions. "I want to exchange for the quenching flame pill," Yi Qingtang said to the Xianming pavilion warden. The quenching flame pill was a type of pill that could stimulate spirit energy and allow the spirit energy in one's body to reach a peak in a short span of time. The disciples watched Yi Qingtang in curiosity and reckoned that the quenching flame pill that she exchanged for was to be used on the life and death ring. However, while the quenching flame pill could boost one's skills in a short time, the duration of the peak state was extremely short. Moreover, it could stimulate the spirit energy to the maximum because it forcefully catalyzed the effect of the spirit energy in the body. Once the effect wore off, the user would fall into a frail condition very quickly. Even if Yi Qingtang consumed the quenching flame pill and displayed her peak abilities, it would still be difficult for her to deal with Song Juanqiu and the rest on the life and death ring. After all, she had not reached the realm of those 4 disciples, and the difference of a stage was enough to produce a landslide victory. The warden looked at Yi Qingtang and said, 100 Xianming points for 1 pill. How many pills do you want? After making an estimation, Yi Qingtang finally replied. 20. Yi Qingtang's words caused the onlooking disciples to be dumbfounded. 20 pills. Is she treating the quenching flame pill as a mud ball? Disciples would only prepare at most 1 pill on usual days. Who would buy 20 pills at once? Is she insane? If she swallowed all of them in a go, wouldn't she explode and die? The warden clearly did not expect Yi Qingtang to ask for so many as well and only returned to his senses after a while. You want 20 pills? Yes. Yi Qingtang nodded. The warden looked at Yi Qingtang strangely and really could not figure out what she wanted those for. However, since she wanted to exchange for the items, he naturally did not have any reason to stop her. Chapter 379, Ice and Fire, 3. The warden took out 20 quenching flame pills and slid away 2,000 Xianming points from Yi Qingtang. To inner sect disciples, 2,000 Xianming points were not considered to be a huge pinch in their hearts, but it was not a small amount either. When the disciples saw Yi Qingtang wasting 2,000 Xianming points just like that, they could not help but mumble that she was a fool. Yi Qingtang kept the quenching flame pills but did not leave. She calculated her remaining Xianming points and subsequently said, I still wish to exchange for ice skin powder. Ice skin powder. The warden raised a brow as he looked at Yi Qingtang with an even stranger expression. If the quenching flame pill was to stimulate spirit energy, then the ice skin powder was a medicinal powder which could completely seal the spirit energy in the body. It was often smeared over one's body during hunting as it could conceal the air released by the spirit energy. However, it would also suppress the use of spirit energy, and hence, most would wipe off the ice skin powder cleanly in a real fight. The two items that Yi Qingtang asked for consecutively were conflicting in nature, and the warden was even more confused as to what Yi Qingtang had up her sleeves. The surrounding disciples were all the more at a loss. Could it be that Yi Qingtang still intended to use the ice skin powder as a secret weapon and scatter it all over Song Juanqiu and the rest on the life and death ring? Just the thought of that caused them to be unable to stifle their laughter. There was not much use for the ice skin powder, and thus, the Xianming points required were not much. However, Yi Qingtang used all her remaining 3,000 Xianming points to exchange for 2 whole buckets of ice skin powder. Without a single Xianming point left, Yi Qingtang finally returned to her residence. As the disciples watched Yi Qingtang leave with 2 buckets of ice skin powder without saying anything, laughter played in the eyes of the disciples in the Xianming pavilion. Near 6,000 Xianming points were spent just like that. How extravagant, if I were to say, wouldn't it be better to cultivate a few hours in the Spirit Consonance River with those Xianming points? What can she do with a pile of quenching flame pills and ice skin powder? Could she swallow all 20 quenching flame pills in a go on the life and death ring? Swallow all? Don't kid me. If she consumed so many of it in a short time, Yi Qingtang would just die on the ring without Song Juanqiu and the rest laying a finger. Watching Yi Qingtang's slowly departing back view, the disciples could not stop snickering as they felt that Yi Qingtang was walking further down the path of death. They were afraid that she would have an ugly death 10 days later. After leaving Xianming Pavilion, Yi Qingtang returned to her residence straight away. Fei Ying was still looking after an Aishang. Thus, Yi Qingtang got herself a bathtub of hot water. She shut her door tightly and laid the quenching flame pills and the ice skin powder aside. Her eyes were narrowed as she looked at the room that was lingering with mist. After testing the temperature of the water, she immediately poured half a bucket of ice skin powder into the bathtub. The ice skin powder, which gave off a cold air, dissolved in the water. Immediately, the water that was initially producing steam lost all its heat and was faintly emitting a slight tinge of cold air. Seeing that the ice skin powder was completely dissolved, Yi Qingtang subsequently took off her outer cloak and entered the bathtub. The ice-cold water brimmed over her in an instant. The effect of half a bucket of ice skin powder caused the water in the bathtub to drop to a piercingly cold temperature. In just a moment, Yi Qingtang's complexion turned pale from the cold. However, she took a deep breath and forced herself to bear the bitter cold. She sat in the bathtub cross-legged, trying with all her might to ignore the prickling cold on her skin. You're tuning in to the Blissful Bookshelf YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.